If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Abandoned and haunted place explorers, paranormal investigators, and ghost hunters, what is the scariest and creepiest encounter you've had?
Abandoned house experience. So there's this house that is close enough to run from straight to my house if I had to, but it's far enough so nothing from the house could find it. However, the history of the house reveals that in 2016, a couple named Karen and Gabe had one child and were considering having another. The couple struggled with depression and drug addiction. There's actually meth still on the counter in the kitchen, but the couple decided they wanted another baby, so she ended up getting pregnant. After using marijuana, meth, painkillers, and several other drugs, the woman ended herself upstairs. The husband began taking painkillers and overdosed and collapsed on the stairs leading upstairs. The police then arrived and took him to the bathroom, which is located right next to the stairs, where they washed off the blood. However, he started coughing up blood, suffered a heart attack, and died there. Since then nobody's been in there. So, my two friends and I entered through the wide open back door and stood in the kitchen, where the temperature had dropped from about 100 degrees outside to just 70 inside. As soon as we all walked in, our shoulders were heavy, and we felt as if we were being watched. So we went upstairs and saw many pill bottles, but the thing that scared me was the doorway. I was standing in the kitchen, looking up, when I saw a figure move towards my friend and then exit the room. I yelled, "What the hell?" I hurried out of the room. Later that day I went back alone and saw a girl in the window, and I went inside, and as soon as I was on the stairs, something whispered to me, "Get out," several times, and as soon as that stopped, something else whispered, "Help me, please," over and over. And then I got scratched. I ran, and I haven't been there since then. So about an hour ago now, my buddy and I went to the G. Pierce Wood Memorial Hospital in Arcadia, Florida, looking to urbex, and we saw something we can't quite explain. We had to park about a mile away from the hospital because it was fenced in and it's pretty far out in the countryside. We walked down the road and ended up outside the front gates. We decided to sit down and figure out the best way to get inside the grounds. While doing so, I heard a woman sobbing in the distance. At the same time, my buddy heard a whistling noise coming from beyond the gate. It was a long, high-pitched whistle similar to the kind used to get someone's attention. I got a weird feeling, and my buddy grabbed my arm and asked, "What animal makes a whistling sound?" I was feeling pretty sketched out at that point, so I told him that we should head out. As I said that, he stopped looking inside the gate like he had been and said, "Ducking run." After he said that, we took off and ran, but we both looked back, and my buddy said he saw a shadow crouching at the corner of the road we ran off of. Once we slowed down, my buddy explained that he had seen a figure about 25 feet past the gate that wasn't being illuminated by the flashlight he was using, and then he saw what he described as the outline of a mask, but almost like someone used a spark moving really fast to outline it over this shadow. He described the mask as having the shape of the one from the original Snow White but not the same face. That was when he told us to run. After getting maybe 90% of the way back to the car, I stopped because I noticed a shadow being cast onto the street behind us, and I asked my buddy if it looked weird to him. It looked like the shadow a person standing under a street light would make, but there was nothing there to make the shadow. I began walking back towards the car. My buddy said to go again, so we ran back to the car and got in. We drove past the location with our lights on, but there was no sign of the shadow figure. As we drove past, I got a really bad feeling looking in the windows of the buildings, though. We drove home without anything else happening. I asked him why he said to run the second time, and he said the shadow started getting smaller, like whatever was making it started walking towards us. Side note, when I first heard the woman's voice, I got a gut feeling to run stronger than I ever have before. Also, this facility has been a mental care facility and a juvenile correction facility as well. The mental facility got shut down following patients dying from staff abuse, and there were suicides that happened on the property. Does anyone know what this could be? Owatonna, Minnesota, the most paranormal town ever. I used to live in Owatonna. So many spooky things happen there. One of my favorite places was the West Hills Museum. It was once an orphanage. I believe now all the children who live there have passed. The place is crazy haunted. If you go to the basement, which anyone has access to, you are guaranteed paranormal activity. Another one of my favorite places to visit was the old graveyard by Quick Trip, a gas station common in the area, and Darts Park. Some of the graves are pretty recent, but some are so old that all you can see are remnants of the designs. You'll quickly realize that most of the old graves were created around the same time. The deaths of entire families occurred within a year. Then there are the crazy mysteries and hush-hush subjects around town. Like how the orphanage basically hurt those children. Living there is toxic between the casual racism and crazy amounts of meth abuse. But visiting there for the history and paranormal stuff is a lot of fun. Fun fact, the 2 original Owatonna high schools burned down, the current one was built in the early 1910s. Abandoned factory. So this took place about 7 months ago when I was hanging out with 6 of my friends after school. We had decided yesterday that we were going to one of the 2 abandoned factories near us. As all 7 of us approach the factory, I start to smell water, concrete, and insulation. We enter this building from the side we get in, and the only lights we have are the flashlights on our phones and the holes in the roof. We took a left instead of going straight, and we came across what I believe to be 2 bathrooms with a mirror smashed in one of them and a toilet smashed in the other, nothing critical. As we headed back to the entrance, I noticed an empty wall and a switchblade beside a wallet. I informed my friends, and one of them picked up the knife just in case. So we head straight and take a right into one of the rooms on the right, and we see a staircase down across to the room. As we make our way towards the staircase, treading on glass and insulation, my friend confides in me that he feels uneasy about the upstairs. However, I dismiss his concerns with indifference. My friends, including the nervous one, proceed upstairs and enter a room on the left. To my surprise, there was a noose. A noose was hanging from the ceiling and touching the ground in the middle of the room, so my friends and I left, went back downstairs, and continued straight down the hallway from the entrance. I acknowledge that it may seem unwise for us to have remained there, yet I cannot explain my decision to stay. As we neared the end of the hallway, we encountered a large room on our left, where, in the far left corner, there was a ladder accompanied by a substantial pile of sand beneath it. My friends, true to their nature, ascended the ladder, with the exception of the more anxious member of our group, and I was the last to follow them up. And the nervous kid behind me said we should leave again, and he was crying, so I told my friends I was going to wait outside with the nervous kid. Since they were on the roof of the building, they remained silent. As I and the nervous kid were walking away from the factory, I heard the sound of police sirens. I then called my one friend who was inside and instructed them to leave. Despite the warning not to trespass, they disobeyed and faced the consequences. I can't stop thinking about the noose swinging in the dark. Well, thank you for listening, everybody. When I was about 15 to 16, I'm 19 now, I and my cousin, who was 10-ish at the time, went for a night walk because I'd been promising him we'd explore at night, so we went to the hill trail by my house. To explain the trail for later in the story, there's a portion heading back where one side of the trail is houses, a road, and streetlights, and the other side is hills with a small portion lit up from bouncing light from the streetlights. And as we entered the trail, that creepy feeling of just knowing something isn't right was there, but being young and with my cousin in high spirits, we kept going. Nothing happened until we started heading back. I forgot about the initial feeling I had and was pretty calm until we heard a really loud bark, but I know it wasn't a bark, it was a really metallic, deep mimic of a bark out of a dry, scraped throat, and I looked to where I heard it, and I saw these yellow eyes. Standing 10 feet tall, inhumanly tall, I couldn't see any facial features or torso or arms, but I could see what looked like white, dirty, muddy animal fur around its belly area, barely lit up by the light of the street light. I knew it was inhuman. I knew it wasn't an animal either, but something trying to mimic the sound of a dog. I felt every hair in my body rise. I felt my blood turn cold and fear take over me, and my cousin and I both saw it, stopped talking, and tried to. I walked back home like nothing was wrong, but everything felt so wrong. Even when we made it out, we still heard those fake, scraped, metallic barks, and that was pretty much it until a few days later when I was biking down my long driveway in front of my house on the other side of the street. I saw, and I swear, a black wolf more the size of a coyote with those same yellow eyes staring at me, and seeing those eyes, I remember not being scared. But time stopped. Instead of riding downhill, I was locked looking into its eyes, stuck in time for what felt like a minute or so, and then snap, I'm back riding downhill, still looking into its eyes, staring at each other as I ride off. I still get scared, and my body reacts in fear every time I think or really tell these stories in detail. I know what I saw, and my cousin did too. If anyone's had similar encounters or experiences, and if you've got any questions, do ask. The shadowy thing in the abandoned apartment block and nightmares. The events of what happened to me happened around December 1, 2017. 30th of November is a special day for Romanians. It is the night of Saint Andrei, a night that in our folklore is supposed to be a night when monsters, werewolves, witches, and strigoi roam free. That night I had nightmares of shadowy figures and monsters and woke up sweaty but shrugged them off. I went out in town for December 1st, which was our national holiday, and hung out with some boys. After some fun out in the town, they showed a video of them exploring an abandoned block and claimed there were ghosts there, and I said it was fake, because there was a voice calling out for her mom that I had heard many times before in spooky videos, and I will disprove the existence of ghosts. They went out at night in peak darkness, but we went in broad daylight with no fear. I was losing faith in God at that time and was more skeptical. The stairs had no rail, that was the only thing that scared me. We visited every apartment on the first floor and confidently reported finding nothing. But on the second or third floor, as I was about to go up, I saw to my left a shadowy figure peeking over the door looking at me despite having no facial features, and it quickly went back in the apartment. I peeked over, and there was nothing in there except rubble. It was very close with slim fingers but claw-like. After checking every floor and making a prank on my friends, I said, "See, there are no ghosts." That night and the one after that, I had the same nightmare as on St. Andre's night, then things went back to normal. I regained faith in God a year ago but recently remembered this. I am aware of a phenomenon where, in the presence of darkness and heightened fear, your mind can trick you into perceiving what you expect to see. However, I was filled with confidence that there were no ghosts present, even though it was daylight. I was only afraid of the stairs without a rail, worried I might fall off. I can't explain what happened that day, but I hope you can help me find out. Ghost of military bases. So just to give context, I'm a Marine, and since being in the military, I have seen weird things. We all have, even the instructors at the School of Infantry. In boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina, it was around 2 a.m. I was on fire watch and saw an orb go into the roof of the building, but that was not the only thing. Months later, as I left the island, I went to North Carolina to the School of Infantry, or Infantry Training Battalion, ITB. We were on the grenade range, and our combat instructor told us we would see some weird shit, but we kind of brushed it off considering we did a 10K hike to the grenade range, and we just wanted to get some sleep. Later on that night a few guys on fire watch freaked out because they saw a little girl run into the woods and keep coming into the perimeter. They said she had a white dress. I never got to see it, but 6 people told me. Later on, at the end of it, it was our last range, and we got in trouble. I forgot why, but he made whole squads get on fire watch instead of just 2 people, and it was pouring down rain, so I had to take a piss, so I jogged across the street. It's like 12 a.m. I go to take a piss, and I hear a loud ducking scream, so I freeze a little to listen to see if I hear anything moving. Then the scream got louder, so I took off running and ran towards my buddies, and I said, "You heard that shit?" And he said, "Yeah, that scream, right?" Chills went down my spine. It was a rough night. I was about 6 or 7 years old. We were on the school bus going home. We stopped to drop off my best friend. As the assistant was undoing the safety clamps on my friend's wheelchair to get her off the bus, there was a loud commotion from the house next door. It's worth mentioning that we all knew the area well, and we all believed, according to my friend living next door, that the house had been abandoned for many years. It was creepy, burnt out, and grimy on the outside. The garden was so overgrown with weeds and tall grass you could not see the path, and the gate was almost off its hinges. The commotion came from a filthy, unkempt, deranged-sounding man who suddenly just appeared out of nowhere and started to run at the open-ended bus. He had something shiny in his hand, and he was ranting insanely. The back was down as the assistant and driver were just about to put my friend on the lift in her wheelchair to take her to her front door. The man tried to get on the back of the bus via the lift, but obviously, as the bus was full of young disabled children, the driver and assistant weren't letting that happen. They quickly raised the lift and shut the doors. The man, frustrated by this, went around the sides of the bus and banged loudly on the windows, scaring us very badly. We had to stay locked in the bus until someone, probably a neighbor, called the police. Now the really creepy thing was, by the time the police arrived, there was no sign of the man at all. It was like he disappeared as fast as he appeared. The police looked for him in and around the house, but they didn't see anything of him. They spoke to the driver and assistant for some time and waited for my friend to be taken to her front door until we drove away. We never did find out who the man was, but I can still remember the incident like it was yesterday. Scariest moment of my life. My name is Isaiah. This incident happened 2 years ago when I was 10. I was a really bad kid, and at the time I wasn't really experienced with abandoned houses. I and my best friend George decided to go to the one at the end of my street. This was my second time and his first. We broke in the window and went upstairs in the house. This is when it gets disturbing. George was on the other side of the floor, and I saw something really suspicious. It was a blanket, a pillow, and, like, 3 beer bottles. That meant a homeless person was living there. I heard this creaking sound. Again, We were around 10 years old, so it's not like we could have taken anyone down. Anyway, I didn't think too much of that sound until this happened. The scariest moment of my life. I saw one of those big gulps of Coke at 7 to 11, and, being a handsy person, I touched the drink. It was cold. My heart stopped. It was a hot day, so that meant it was recently bought. Someone was with us. I signaled to George for us to get the duck out. He said, "Isaiah, I want to see this person." I didn't care. I pulled him down, but it was too late. I heard him come up. I pulled George back up quickly but quietly to hide. He looked through the whole house. We didn't leave because he would see us. We departed approximately 20 minutes later, having heard nothing. I still remember leaving the house and seeing through the window a 25-year-oldish black man with dreads. I left terrified. My sister and I went to an abandoned church. There's this old abandoned church around where I live, and it might be 200 to 250 years old. There's a graveyard surrounding it, except for the driveway. Satanic rituals and other activities once took place there. My sister, me, and a couple of other people went there to explore tonight. Two of the people with us decided to taunt whatever was in there. All that really happened was we heard the piano playing, and the glass from the shattered windows started crunching when we were quiet. Everyone but my sister and me decided to leave. My sister walked over to some broken glass and said, "I really want to pick one up and take it, but I know that probably won't end well." So I said, "Okay, well, I will." I picked up a small shard and put it in my pocket. We exited and began our descent down the hill when, unexpectedly, I lost my footing, and it felt as though my legs were being pulled from beneath me. I gave the shard to my sister and told her to throw it back in the church. Anyways, I tore my calf muscle, and I'm just wondering, has anyone else had a spirit/demon harm them? An abandoned house. 4 of my friends and I decided to go ghost hunting at this abandoned house a few years ago. We go in, and it's super ducking creepy. There were drawings all over the walls, satanic shit, the floors were caving in, and it was raining. Super creepy. So we go upstairs and sit in the center of the room. We set up the equipment and start asking questions. My friend's girlfriend kept saying she wanted to go outside and see if there's anything out there. I told her it would be difficult to capture any voices because of the outside noise and the rain. It would be useless. Suddenly, my friend's girlfriend states that she heard scratching coming from one room. Being skeptical, I told her it was bullshit. We went to that room. There was a ducking pentagram drawn on the floor. It covered the entire floor of the room. I don't really like messing with shit like that, so at that point I look at my friends and say, "Duck that. Duck this. I'm out of here." I handed them the EVP stuff and walked out of the house. It was raining harder, and my friend's car was locked. We were trespassing, so I thought I would be useful and be on the lookout for cops. Sure enough, I see a cop car in the distance. He stops outside the house. We were smart and parked down the street. So I called my friend and warned them of the cop and told them to turn off all the lights and to shut up. The cop finally leaves. Suddenly 2 of my friends come running out. I asked them where my other friend and his girlfriend were at. They told me they were getting creeped out, so they left the 2 in the house because they wanted to keep investigating it. Within 2 minutes they come running out and tell us to get in the car. We quickly drive off. I asked them what happened, and they said they kept hearing noises behind them. We get to my friend's girlfriend's apartment, and we start listening to the EVP. Not much happened. Suddenly, I hear a whisper near the end. "There's nothing outside." It talked over my friend and his girlfriend right before they stated they wanted to leave. It was like mocking us, saying there was nothing outside. I got chills hearing that. They got chills hearing that. They also said there were a lot of dead birds in the basement and that there was more satanic shit where they were. We haven't gone back since because of how creepy and eerie it was. Central State Asylum. So this is my first time ever sharing this paranormal experience, mainly because nobody would believe me. I can't really even explain what happened on this night, but it still freaks me out to this day. One night in mid-June, my friends and I were trying to find something to do since our town was small and barren. My friend, let's call her A, got a text about a supposedly haunted asylum about 20 minutes away from us. We'd never heard of it before this night, but I was very adventurous, so I convinced them to go with me. On the drive there, my friends were starting to get spooked because of the lack of street lamps and just the overall vibe of the area. I parked the vehicle in an already suspicious spot because it looked like there were people in a car following us and then parking in the same lot. This lot is very out of the way, and it is not typical for anyone to be there. This asylum is near a police station, so they have patrols that roll down the roads very often. Some officers even stake out near it, props to them. We had to traverse a very overgrown field and navigate through some woods to avoid the patrols. Then there was a wide open field, which was very eerie. Staring at the asylum that we were heading to, my heart started pumping. The expedition was the very first time I've done something like this. It was thrilling just to be a part of. We found a hole that we could crawl into that was part of the smokestack of the asylum. I crawled into the hole with just the flashlight of my phone, but it was an instant mistake. I crawled right into a nest of bats. It was the most terrifying experience I've ever had. It felt like I was in the opening scene of Scooby-Doo. After all that happened, we finally started to progress into the asylum after 10 minutes of arguing. We started seeing graffiti, but not typical teenage stuff. We were seeing pentagrams and satanic messages. My friends kept getting spooked by false shadows. Perhaps they weren't real, but I'm uncertain. I was eager to continue exploring, but they had already exhausted this option. So they ended up staying in the first main room and explored there. I ventured into the most expansive area of the asylum on my own, which proved to be a grave mistake. I crept forward into the dark and stumbled upon a row of furnaces for God knows what. Then I saw a pentagram in red with a weird sentence next to it that didn't make sense. I read it, though. I don't know if it had anything to do with what happens next, but it might be a possibility. Right after I read it, I heard a bottle drop and saw a shadow along the back wall. I was not waiting to find out who or what that was. I'm not that guy. I hurried into the room with my friends, and we quickly made our way out into the open field. We took a moment to gather our thoughts, during which I discovered that my friend, T, had sustained a scratch on his back. Out of nowhere, a female voice coming from the asylum shrieked louder than anyone I've ever heard. Then we booked it straight to the car without looking back. While we were running through, I could have sworn that I heard the female voice laughing. Was she laughing at us because we were cowards? Maybe she was taunting us to come back into that asylum. I assure everyone one thing, I will never be going back there ever again. I've been dreaming of this abandoned asylum I've never been to for years, and I just found out now. So I have a recurring ability where I can dream of people and places I've never met or been to but will actually be there and meet them shortly in the future. Mostly, these dreams involve significant events in my life, such as attending a university or starting a new job. But this most recent one severely freaked me out because I had no idea that for years, and when I say this, it's probably been 8 years maximum, I have been having dreams of different rooms inside an abandoned asylum I've never been to. The way I figured this out is because I and my friend were watching this series of TikTok reels of places that have been abandoned in the UK yesterday. And then they went around this asylum in a city called Lincoln that has been abandoned for over 30 years, and I was in such shock because I could remember multiple dreams of different rooms and had no idea that all of these dreams were connected, and I even had dreams of different parts of the asylum being demolished that aren't there anymore. One that stands out is the water tower because I was running away from it as it was about to fall on top of me. Or this garden that has shattered glass as if there were greenhouses or some things with glass roofs. But it's not just that. I dream about a variety of people. Sometimes they're chasing after me. Sometimes they're lovely, and we talk, like this well-dressed guy with a brown, kind of pointy beard. Dressed kind of vintage or smart retro, now I think of it, could have been a therapist or some sort of doctor. One time I was in the World War hiding from invading soldiers, and they wanted to make me fight for their side. Another time there was me and my 2 friends I used to live with running towards this giant tree as a swarm of people were trying to get us. I honestly don't know what to do about this. It's been going on for years now, and this place has been abandoned for over 30 years. There is no one there and nothing happening to this place. As far as I'm aware, anyway. I told my mom, and she says my granddad, who passed away when I was just a toddler, used to live opposite there. That's literally the only connection I have so far, but I've never actually been there, as it was shut down nearly 10 years before I was born. If anybody wants to search this place, it's called Bracebridge Heath, otherwise known as St. John's Hospital in Lincoln. It probably won't show up on Google Maps because it's been abandoned for so long. My paranormal experience. Hello, everyone. I want to share something that hasn't left my mind since it happened. Before I get to the story, I just want to give a small disclaimer. Do not go to abandoned buildings. And if you do, be careful. Do not take anything from the building. We were very stupid for doing what we did. Now into the story. It all happened last year. Day 1, house entering. So I live in a tiny village where there aren't many places to go. I and my friends needed a place where we could go without being seen by other people, and because in my village there are many abandoned houses, we decided we'd go in one. We went in like 2 houses, and then we saw a house that we hadn't noticed before. We decided to go in. Like any other abandoned house, we found it locked. We had a crowbar with us, so we tried to break the lock. We managed to break it, but we still couldn't open the door. I broke one of the small windows of the door and peeked to see. There was a chair blocking the door. Weird, isn't it? Anyway, we went in. The house was clean for an abandoned house. It was very tidy. Except for one room. The room was cluttered with clothes. That was the first room we went in. However, it wasn't a big deal, so we decided we'll go into another room. The bedroom. It was locked. We broke the lock again and went in. After 10 or 15 minutes, the door shut, there wasn't any wind outside, and the front door and the windows in the room were closed. We tried to open it, it was locked, after we broke the lock? How? However, after some time, we managed to escape. We decided that we'll do the stupidest thing ever. We carved our names into the wall with a knife. We also decided we'll take some stuff like knives, a small hammer, church candles, gas masks, etc. However, we got out of the bedroom and went to a small hallway. We found another locked door nearby. After a while we unlocked it, and the hammer broke in the process. The door served as an exit, but it also opened into a large room that led to the basement. But we'll get to it later. We went into the kitchen, and there was another bed and a weirdly placed mirror. It was placed on a table facing another mirror on the wall. Could it be a psychomantium? Then we decided we'd go to the basement. We went in there, and all three of us got a severe headache. One of my friends almost fainted. We managed to escape and reach the basement where we had previously entered. We stayed in there for a while, and we decided to get out of the house. That was our spot to meet now. At least we thought so. Day 2, photo session day. On the second day, I and one of my friends, let's call her Jane, decided we'd bring our cameras, and so we did. Jane took this photo of herself in the mirror in the hallway. Her face looks very demonic. Her head is almost like a skull without any skin on it, and her eyes are almost completely white. That's not what she looks like normally. A small white circle, resembling a round head, is visible behind her in the mirror. It might be dirt from the mirror, but I don't know. On the other hand, my other friend, let's call her Elena, asked me to take some photos of her, and the photos were all normal until. On the right side is Elena. She's wearing a white t-shirt, her hair and a little bit of her face are visible on the left side, and there's a white object next to her. It can't be me because first, I wasn't wearing white at all, and second, I wasn't seen in the mirrors because I was on its side. It's not light because I wasn't using any flashlight or anything, and the only window in the room was behind the mirror. This is the mirror I was telling you about on the first day. Day 3, decoration. On the third day in the house, we decided to show it to our other friend. For the story I'll call her Mary. We showed Mary the place, and we usually were mostly staying in the bedroom because it was the most comfortable and it was light. We decided we'll decorate it. We reorganized the books and magazines we saw on one shelf, and Mary found some kind of photos of different places, and we had nails from the basement, so she decided she'll put them on the wall. We were lying in the beds and doing all this stuff without knowing about the photos and what we captured. Day 4, realization and apologies. When my friends noticed all of this, they started spamming me at 2 a.m. Jane's mother had an awful nightmare and woke up with tears. Screaming in her dream, she saw, I quote, a woman with skin as white as snow. Almost as if she were dead. She told me, we had done a terrible thing, and you need to return everything you took. Note, Jane's mother didn't know we had taken stuff from the house. After talking for a while, we decided to sleep, return to the house, put everything back, and apologize. And that's exactly what we did. We promised every time we walk past the house, we'll say have a good day. Hello, or something nice. We continue to do so even now. We never told Mary about the photos and what happened for her own good. We did this for her own protection. We are still not 100% sure if this house was haunted, but we definitely learned our lesson. Tell me what you think about this. I hope you enjoyed the story. Stay safe and away from ghosts. Abandoned house down the street. This happened a few years ago. I was close friends with this one girl, I'm going to call her A. It was July, and we were hanging out. My friend told me about this really creepy house down the road from her place. We had been exploring abandoned houses all summer, and she had never mentioned this one. I asked A about the house, and she shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She told me how a few months ago she and her other friend went into the house. Nothing seemed weird or out of place. However, she informed me that as they stood in the remnants of the living room, a deep growl emanated from all directions. Not just behind them or above them, but the sound surrounded them. They sprinted out and went home, not really ever talking about it. Me being dumb, it piqued my interest. We had been to a handful of houses before, and nothing unusual ever happened. I convinced A to take me to this house. She laughed a little. She agreed to take me, as long as we get baked beforehand. Sure, okay, I'm not 100% sure that's going to help, but okay. So she packed a bowl, did her thing, and we were off. It was a 15-minute walk from her place, and you couldn't really see the house from the street. It was surrounded by trees and high grass. We found a little path into the house. It was only maybe 20 feet from the street. As we explored the property, we couldn't spot or hear a single bird. There was just absolutely no wildlife around this house. We walked around and found a jar of nails, a jar of pea and rusty nails, and an altar of some sort with 2 chairs in front of it. There was a little shed-like thing 10 feet from the house with a copper wire leading to the attic of the house. We found 2 mounds of dirt that had grass growing on top of them. They kind of looked like graves. Altogether it's pretty weird, and I'm uncomfortable. This place feels weird, and we haven't even gone inside this little cottage yet. Around the side of the house lay a homemade ladder on the ground, and it had been there a while. We finally made our way to the front door and made our way in. The place was half burnt up, with huge holes in the ceiling. To your left was shelving, and to your right was the living room. It had 2 couches, burnt up and little. A TV and a table were in the living room, and through the living room was the kitchen. The kitchen was burnt to a crisp. There was no way to get into the kitchen to look around, and the same was true with the back hallway leading to the bedrooms. She walked through the living room. I sort of followed her, not really entering. This place was giving me the creeps. There were gas jugs littered all over the place, and the place just felt heavy and unwelcoming. As I was looking around, A was leaning on the couch looking at a wallet. Suddenly I heard footsteps above us. Like I said before, there were holes in the ceiling that led to the attic. There's also no possible way to get to the attic from inside the house. Freaked out, I looked at A to see if she heard it too. She looked at me, and suddenly the footsteps were coming from all around us, above us, beside us, and in front of us. We freaked and ran through the front door and ran back home. After we calmed down, we asked each other if we heard the footsteps. We were 100% positive we were alone in that house. For weeks after, I would see a dark mass in my room and out of the corner of my eye. I was having a string of bad luck. The last time I saw the mass-like being, I got into a car accident, and when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw this black mass in my back seat. I'm uncertain whether it was related to the house we visited or not. But I am never going back in that house again. I never felt like this before during urbex. Did I encounter a bad spirit or something similar? So, my friend and I live in Europe. We travel a lot together to places around here to explore abandoned places. It's a fun hobby I can only recommend. But one place scared me, and I think I won't come back to that place. It was on a Friday evening when we read about a place deep in the Alps. We went to a bar that was a bit older in our town and asked the older folks about their knowledge about it. It was an old brewery deep in the forests up in the Alps, where they also made cheese, apparently. So after all of the prep, we went out there. We drove 2 hours, and after we reached the end of the road, we had to hike and walk through a part of the forest to get there. After quite a while we found the old dirt road that led up to the building. We walked up the way for a bit, and once we settled near the buildings, we got started. We had flashlights on and slowly walked around the place to find a way into it. We found a window that was already out of its frame, which led right away down into the restroom. We climbed in and slowly looked around at the stuff on the floor and walls. It was quite a stunning place. Lots of documents and otherwise important stuff were scattered around. After some time, we entered a tiled room that was adorned with a gigantic pot made of polished metal and copper, surrounded by numerous pipes. Once we looked around, my friend covered his eyes and hissed like he'd been hurt or something. Before I was able to ask him what was wrong, my head started to hurt a lot. I had to close my eyes too just to make sure I wouldn't fall over because of the feeling. And once I opened them again, I had such a massive nosebleed, which stained my shirt and hoodie like hell. We felt so ill and unwell that we quickly made our way out of there. When others inquired about it weeks later, we simply informed them that we had found nothing. I can't explain it, but I'm somewhat uncomfortable knowing that my blood is on that tiled floor. Do you have any idea what could have caused that? There was an abandoned hospital in Downriver, Michigan. This was 5 years ago. When we were 14 to 15 years old, my good friends and I would sneak out every weekend, with the help of our older high school friends who would drive us to various locations. In this particular situation, we decided to check out an 8th-floor abandoned hospital located 10 minutes away from our city. It was 12 a.m. during one of the worst winters Michigan had experienced in the past 12 years, with a wind chill of at least -15 due to the hospital's proximity to the Detroit River. So my friends and I arrived trying not to draw attention because we don't want police attention. We jumped a 6-foot brick wall only to fall into the courtyard, which had easily 5 feet of unshoveled snow, so we trudged through it to the only entrance of the hospital, which is a back door with a staircase that goes up and down to the basement. Every other door was chained or barricaded, so we made entry and immediately saw satanic worshipping symbols on the walls in red spray paint and some type of sacrificed animal that was too mutilated to even tell what it was. It was the size of a small dog, so at this point my 4 friends and I are disgusted, horrified, and a little pissed off. 2 of my friends go down to the basement, while I and the other 2 go upstairs. Flashlights in tow, we all kept seeing silhouettes moving across the hallways in front of us, but always from a distance, so we brushed it off for the moment. But then we had a medical desk tip over in the room down the hall from us, which sent items flying out from the room into the hall. We ran so fast, not knowing if it was a bum or a demon. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to us, my other 2 friends in the basement of the hospital had found the room where they stored all the hospital beds and swore something was thrown right at them and were so certain they found the morgue in that. We had to check it out because there was something we had to see. So as we moved down the stairs, I kept hearing faint singing, as if it was a little girl, so I kept thinking my friend behind me was being a smartass, and I go, "John Doe, quit the shit, bro." He replied, "I thought that was you." So we stop in unison, and all of us hear what sounds like a little girl humming a song. However, it was only a few flights of stairs above us, so we collectively decided to leave the building, climbed over the wall, and departed. We attempted to return on several occasions, but the increased police patrols in the area made it far too risky. I moved from Idaho to Alaska about 2 months ago, and already I have experienced something I never thought I would ever experience. After taking a week to recover from a 5-day trek across Canada on the Alaska Highway, I had decided I was going to get out and explore the wilderness of my new home state and try to catch a glimpse of the wildlife, such as moose and bears. The house I am renting is on the outskirts of the nearest town, so I basically live right in the middle of the forest and have access to miles of dense woods. I still don't know what I had been thinking when I decided to go into the woods with nothing but my phone, which at the time didn't get service in Alaska, and some earbuds. I began by running at a medium pace into the woods, hopping over bushes and branches while jamming out to some shaky graves. I had probably gone through about 5 songs when my shoelace got hooked on a fallen tree and I was thrown to the ground face first. I immediately got back up, swore out of irritation, and began to put my earbuds back in when I realized I had no idea where I was. At some point, I lost my sense of direction and could only vaguely recall my previous direction. I began to run in the direction I thought I had come from, feeling panicked and second-guessing myself when I realized I should have come out into my backyard long ago. I would rather not panic because I knew that it would make everything worse if I did, and I started to try and pinpoint the right direction. Eventually, I realized that I was hopelessly and utterly lost, without the slightest indication of which way would lead me to any form of civilization. After a few brief moments of cursing and groaning, I decided to follow my gut and go in the direction I thought would possibly lead me home. Running at full speed, I hoped to break the tree line in a matter of minutes, but something on the ground caught my attention. It was a backpack. I stopped instantly and looked around for a person or a campsite, but there was nothing I could see from the spot I was at, which was situated at the bottom of a small hill. The bag looked as if it had been abandoned for a few days at least but was slightly damp from the rain earlier that morning. I kneeled down and picked the bag up, resting it against my knees. It had a heavy weight to it when I moved it, so I knew that there was something inside. Looking back now, I remember the dark feeling I had gotten in my chest right before I had unzipped the main part of the backpack. Inside there were bags of what I immediately knew was an assortment of illegal drugs and items used to administer them. I quickly stood up and took a step back. I had such a powerful feeling of dread that I felt like I was in imminent danger. I just wanted to get out of there and find my way home, so I started to run again up to the top of the hill. I was hit with a wave of excitement when I saw a house at the bottom that was buried in the trees. I had begun to make a start for it when something in my head told me to stop. The thought entered my mind that what I had just discovered was very close to the house. I wanted so badly to be out of the woods and find some form of civilization, but something told me that it wasn't safe. I ran away from the house along the tree line, hoping that I would possibly stumble upon another house. After about 10 to 15 minutes, I stumbled into a neighborhood of sorts and asked a man working in his yard for directions. He was kind enough to drive me home and assure me everybody gets lost in Alaska at some point. As soon as I got home, I showered and chugged some water and then immediately called the police to report what I had seen. However, due to the fact that I had no idea where I was, I couldn't tell them where to find the drugs or where the house was, so my report was basically useless. I just would have felt guilty if I hadn't at least said something. I've driven all over the area down different roads trying to find the house, but I never have. It's probably for the best, though, because I would rather not get caught up in something I shouldn't be. I'm glad I had listened to my gut and kept running from that house, because people in possession of such a large amount of illegal drugs can be extremely dangerous. Whispers at an abandoned training school. Near my home, there's a military-style training school that was opened in 1918 for the purpose of training delinquent boys and girls who could not properly be dealt with at home or in the public schools. The school, spanning approximately 3,100 acres, closed its doors in 2008, partly due to lawsuits alleging abuse. I know from personal sources that there have been multiple counts of hurt and abuse throughout the campus. Multiple children went missing from the school, and there were alleged murders, but I'm not sure about that. Despite its vast expanse, the campus only occupies approximately 20 acres. The rest is forest. Now abandoned, I often take my dog, a pretty big German Shepherd, who's definitely not scared of anyone, to run and play throughout the property. There are dairy barns, silos, and ruined tractors. Obviously, they were completely self-sufficient. There are countless houses and shacks on old trails. My dog's favorite spot is an old pool now turned pond. Behind it, there's an old dirt road that has a gate blocking it. After visiting the area for a few months, I decided to explore the old dirt road. I parked my truck, and my dog and I walked around the gate. The road was about 3 miles long, with multiple barns and various farm buildings throughout. After 2 miles, there are no more buildings. We kept walking, and I saw an abandoned bus completely off the road. It wasn't much, but it creeped me out. There was a giant stream that led off of the road, and I decided to follow it, especially since my dog loves to get his feet wet. I stumbled upon a pile of bricks in the middle of the woods, with absolutely nothing else around. Upon closer inspection, I realized that it was an old foundation that was about 20 by 20 foot. Although the wind wasn't blowing hard, it started to whistle. It intensified to the point where it sounded like soft whispers surrounding me. The aspect that truly unsettled me was that my dog was scanning the surroundings and barking, similar to his behavior when a stranger knocks on the door. However, he was also tucking his tail between his legs and trembling. I nearly sprinted to the truck, and we left the area promptly. We still go to the pool/pond, but I haven't gone down that road again. This story is a recounting of a terrifying incident that 3 of my friends experienced during the summer after our junior year in high school. I very nearly became a part of the tale myself, but a scheduled shift at the movie theater saved me. They showed up at my house earlier that day, asking if I wanted to join them in exploring an unsearched area of the woods. However, due to my work shift later that evening, I had to decline. Over 25 years have passed since this incident, making it difficult to recall everything, but I will do my best. Looking back now at the way life was then, I can positively say things have changed greatly for kids. My neighborhood was its own self-contained city on the edge of the city limits. At the end of the 60s, some idealistic developer got the crazy idea to buy up hundreds of rolling acres of prairie and forest land out in the middle of nowhere. He created a little suburban sprawl for the coming rise of manufacturing, and the people needed to fill those jobs. The factories did come, Johnson & Johnson, Folgers Coffee, places such as that, but within 30 years, they would begin to leave just as quickly. The children of these factory workers found themselves separated from their peers in the rest of the city, and with nothing better to do, they took to the woods surrounding them to explore and discover nature, much as their distant ancestors who settled this land hundreds of years before. I was one of these children, and so were my 3 friends who would make the discovery on one of these journeys into the woods. Without me along, they took to the fields opposite the new highway. These stretched for miles back then, and during this summer was lying fallow. Our part of Texas rides the line between prairie land and riparian forest. You may find yourself walking for miles on open land only to discover a vast expanse of woods before reaching the next field. After walking for miles across nothing, they came upon a forested area most of us had yet to explore. A path led to an abandoned barn. When they turned the corner to look inside of it, they came face to face with the corpse of a hanged man. From what I was told later, not one of them believed it to be real. However, as they got closer, there was no longer any doubt. The body was that of a trucker who had parked his 18-wheeler at the nearby truck stop around Christmas. He walked the 3 or so miles into the woods and ended his life. To this day, no one knows if he knew that the barn was there or he just happened upon it, but we do know that on that hot, humid summer day, his bloated body posed a horrific sight to them. Realizing someone was likely missing him, my friends returned to the very same truck stop he had walked away from the year before and called the cops. Of course, I didn't hear all about this until the next day. Even though it did sound like an amazing adventure, I'm thankful I had to sit it out. All 3 of them went on to various legal and emotional troubles, including battles with drug addiction. The only one left living, Stephen, has spent several stints in and out of institutions, and the last time we spoke, little of my childhood friend remained. I can't say the trucker's body discovery was the only reason for their decline, but it surely contributed. I had to stop doing urbex. Something haunted me. I've always loved urbex and used to go out with my friends to film abandoned sites with some paranormal activity. I always approached each experience with a great deal of respect, documenting and learning from each one, but one day something changed. We walked into a beautiful house built in 1952. I had been there before, but this time, something changed. I started noticing strange things in my house, like footsteps coming up the stairs, knocking and banging, and one day a glass exploded in the kitchen. I had to do a spiritual cleansing, and I haven't done urbex since. Then over time, I found out that the owner of the house was my great-grandfather's boss. I was in a nearby abandoned Navy hospital with several friends. We had been in many times before and never had anything odd happen. We were on the top, third, floor, and there were many broken windows, allowing the rain and wilderness in. There was much mold and even moss growing in the old ceiling tiles that covered the floor at this point. One of our group, prone to asthma and respiratory issues, didn't take it too well. We all decided it was best to leave and started our descent into the basement, which was the route to the exit. This is when things got weird. I strayed ahead of the group, which is generally against our exploration rules, but I felt compelled to escape. I was far enough ahead, around corners and such, that I couldn't even see their flashlights behind me anymore. My heart was racing, and I still don't know why. I finally got to the last door that led to the room we would exit. It was a heavy, self-closing door. I reached for the doorknob, but something stopped me. I couldn't do it, something in my mind wasn't letting me put my hand on the doorknob. I felt fear. I'm not sure how long I stood there, shaking with my hand no more than 3 inches from the doorknob, before I saw the flashlights of my friends at the end of the hallway. Finally, I could do it. I wrenched the door open and immediately went outside, hyperventilating with panic. My friends soon joined me, also saying something felt a little weird in there that time. We were gathering outside of the door when the friend with the breathing issues felt something on her shoulder. We pulled down her shirt, and there was a noticeable, quite obvious handprint. Nobody touched her, especially not hard enough to leave a full handprint through clothing. We've been back several times and haven't had another experience in any way. Which makes it even more odd, if you ask me. The abandoned farmhouse and the unexplained sound. My boyfriend and I live in a small beach town on the East Coast, and it's surrounded by lots of farmland. In the off-season, when it's too cold to go to the beach, we like to drive around on back roads and explore. One day we were driving on a long country road. Houses were very sparse, it was mostly just fields with trees in the distance. Eventually we came upon an old dive bar/tavern in the middle of nowhere and decided to stop for a drink. It was just what you'd expect, a dimly lit local watering hole with a pool table and some NASCAR posters, always A+. After hanging out for about a half hour, we decided to move on. As we were walking out to the parking lot, we noticed an old abandoned farmhouse directly across the street, set back a ways from the road. We often go into abandoned houses when we see them, so we decided to check this one out. We pulled out of the parking lot and crossed the street to turn down the dirt road leading to the house. We got out of the truck, and my boyfriend started walking up to the open side door. I was taking pictures and didn't follow him immediately. After he reached the doorway, I noticed he stopped and stood there without going in. After a few seconds I heard him go, "Oh, duck." I hurried over, positioned myself next to him, and peered through the doorway. The front room was your typical abandoned house, a couple of old pieces of furniture overturned, broken windows. There was also a dead animal in the middle of the floor that I think was a cat. Still, nothing too crazy, just average abandoned house stuff. I turned to my boyfriend to ask him what was wrong, and he goes, "Shh. Listen." I looked beyond the front room toward the back of the house into another room. Black sheets of plastic hung completely motionless from the ceiling. Then I heard a sound. The only way I can describe it is that it sounded like the house was breathing. Like it was taking deep, slow, groaning breaths. We both just stood there, looking at each other and listening to it, like, what the duck? There was no wind. There were no cars on the road. We didn't see anything that could have been making that sound. It wasn't even a sound I've ever heard before. There's definitely no way a person or even an animal could sound like that. It encompassed the whole house. Then my boyfriend noped the duck out of there, and as soon as he started walking away, I had the overwhelming urge to run after him, like I would rather not be left alone anywhere near that house. We got in the truck and left as quickly as possible. We usually go into abandoned houses without hesitation, but this time, neither of us dared to walk through that doorway. I also tend not to believe in the paranormal, but I have no explanation for what happened that day. The shack on Kessington. So this story took place about 5 years ago. I was 18 at the time, had just gotten my license, and had a desire to explore. My friends and I would spend our weekend nights exploring abandoned buildings or supposedly haunted buildings in the area. We were thrill seekers, and it was an exciting thing to do in a very rural location. I told my uncle about some of the adventures my friends and I would go on, and he told me that when he was my age, he did similar things with his friends. He described to me a small shack on Kessington Road in Michigan, about 40 minutes from my house. He stated that when he was younger, he and his friends heard rumors about a cult that would inhabit the grounds and do rituals with blood and goat carcasses. This obviously sounds like the typical, fake cult story, but it piqued their interest. One night, they drove to Kessington in hopes of something exciting happening. They got just that. As they arrived, a man came out to the street with a shotgun and scared them away. As they sped down the dirt road, a deer ran in front of them a little ways down the street, and they flipped their car into a ditch. Police came and investigated. The man with a shotgun was just a squatter. A few months passed, and my uncle noticed something on Crime Stoppers. The man that came out to the edge of the road was ended, and his killer was not known. The whole incident was enough to make my uncle and his friends not want to go anywhere near that place again. Well, this story really interested me. And I mean, really interested me. The following weekend, I shared this story with my friends, and we decided to visit the shack, given its proximity. I typed in Kessington Road in my Apple Maps app along with a few other key things my uncle had said it was close to. I found the location, and on a Saturday night my friends and I set out for adventure. The directions were fairly difficult to follow. The closer we got to the destination, the fewer cars we saw until there was absolutely no other traffic. There were just deserted cornfields on both sides of us. The paved road we were driving on approached a T intersection with a paved road going left to right. This was as far as the GPS would take us. Kessington Road was ahead, not left or right, but straight ahead. The road was dirt and not even shown as a road on my Maps app. We drove on this dirt road for about 3 minutes before we located the shack. It was a remarkably small building. It was slightly larger than a shed. There was no mailbox or address on the house. Wood boarded up the windows, giving the house an almost empty appearance. We didn't know what we'd find, given that my uncle had visited the place probably 10 years prior. The place still gave us the creeps, perhaps it was because of the boarded up windows and the absolute lack of life in its surroundings. We pulled over to the side of the road in front of the shack, all of us afraid to get out and explore. We rolled the windows down and turned the car completely off to see if we could hear anything. I swear to you we heard chanting, a repetition of words being said. However, we were unable to comprehend the spoken words or determine whether they were in English. This gave us chills, but we continued to see what else we could hear. Beneath the chanting was an extremely old broadcast being played. It sounded like a World War II era radio program. The location and the sounds were enough to give us goosebumps, and we left with chills. We returned again a week later to hear the same old broadcast playing. Nothing else happened other than that. It was such a mysterious location. A few weeks had passed, and we decided we wanted to check the place out again, this time in daylight. We headed there feeling more confident now that we weren't surrounded in darkness. We parked the car on the side of the dirt road again and actually got out and approached the shack. A friend of mine went around back while I held my ear against the window trying to see if I could hear anyone inside. As we are investigating, a car drives by. It was peculiar, to say the least, that this shack was located in a remote area on a dirt road, far from any other houses. We brushed it off and continued investigating. My friend comes around and tells me what the back looks like as the same vehicle drives by again from the opposite direction not even a minute later. We paid closer attention this time but couldn't see the driver because the windows were tinted. We started to grow more cautious. Again the car circled back around and drove past us. This was it, we ran back to the car and drove out of there. We made a turn on the next available street, and to our surprise, the same car was now following behind us. We were terrified. We made random turns anywhere we could to try to lose them, but we couldn't shake them. They followed close behind us for what felt like an hour but was probably only about 10 minutes. Eventually they backed off. It'd be a while before we returned to the shack on Kessington. Another boring night in rural Michigan approached us about a month or two later, and we decided to head to Kessington again. I know it may not seem like a fun time, but the mystery behind the place was exhilarating. The place almost drew us in, we craved more. This time it was late, maybe 1 a.m. or so. As we drove up to the shack, we noticed something unusual. There was a big white van on the side of the road in front of the shack. Instead of parking along the road, the van stood perpendicular to it. The front half of the van was on the dirt road while the back half was in the field. For this stranger, the van's doors were wide open and wires were hanging from the bottom of the van. No one was inside or around. It was just abandoned. It looked like an abduction scene. Needless to say, we didn't stop our car to listen for any noises this time. We saw this set and left. I haven't returned to the shack since. There was such mystery to this location, from the murdered squatter to boarded up windows and being chased to the abandoned van with doors wide open. This place was strange. It's a mystery that I'm not meant to discover. Does anyone have any theories on how to deal with paranormal areas that may or may not contain malevolent creatures? I and my boyfriend live around NW, Arkansas, to be specific, in the rural middle of nowhere, surrounded by hundreds upon hundreds of acres of thick woods and caves and overhangs everywhere, with no cities nearby, and the closest thing to a city is a medium-sized town about 30 miles away. The specific area we live in happens to sit on native burial grounds, possibly war grounds, and has a lot of dark history around the early settlers and Native Americans. We and our neighbors have had animals mutilated and left for dead, not eaten on, just slashed and ripped apart, organs left untouched, and everything. I and my boyfriend have had some weird experiences, to say the least, especially him having lived on the property for years. Once he was walking through the woods and stumbled upon a place where the colors were too vibrant and unnatural, stumbled across a field of bones, turned and saw a massive black humanoid creature with straight cow-shaped but goat-textured horns, and it even screamed. Another time, we went to a cave and overhang, heard something call for us the whole way home, and the woods went vacuum chamber silent on a windy day, just the usual run of creepy, scary feelings like something is hunting us. I know this sounds silly, we both do, and we are aware it could be us freaking ourselves out. If you're going to say that, don't. The big question is, for those who believe there are things out there that may mean us harm, what do you do when entering an area you know has something wrong with it? Why are they there? How are they there? Really, just give us theories, rules for dealing with cryptids, just anything so we're prepared next time we go to those areas. This also happens around the house. Walking to my car occasionally leaves me with the worst feeling in the world, like I'm being stalked. Tonight my boyfriend and his friend were standing on the other side of the house. I was sitting in the garage with the door open, sitting on the steps facing the door while on my phone. I heard footsteps walking back and forth, even though my boyfriend and his friend were talking and laughing on the other side of the house. I even saw my boyfriend's boots walk in front of the door. I called him while watching it happen and heard his phone ring from the other side of the house. He answered, and I watched the boots pass by again. When I realized it wasn't him, I got up and headed inside, just as something began to pound on the other garage door. Both he and his friend were on the other side of the house the entire time. It's not just in certain areas, it's even at the property. This half of our town is plagued by negative energy. According to my boyfriend, it's been getting worse. My experience in an abandoned infirmary. When I was about 14, I worked at the in-house restaurant at a retirement community. We housed both fully functional and completely dependent elderly. Overall, it was a nice place, and the people were pretty friendly. I knew the building was older since there had been multiple other establishments in it before the retirement community moved in and took up the place, but definitely not that old. I started working there only about 20 years ago. I'm currently in my mid-20s, for context. The building never felt strange or weird to me. That is, until I heard about the abandoned wing we used for storage. Apparently before the retirement community came in, they had an infirmary wing of the facility that they used to treat people who needed immediate care and couldn't wait for ambulances to arrive. Due to the nature of their work and the fragility of the elderly guests, it was not uncommon for people to pass away there. I'm sure this reputation alone led to many of my coworkers making up stories about the place since some of them were pretty far-fetched. The most consistent stories I heard were doors opening and closing on their own and the showers and lights turning on and off. While the stories were not particularly unusual, they were nonetheless unsettling. Occasionally somebody would swear up and down that they saw wheelchairs moving on their own or heard somebody, but that was rare and didn't get much credence. Most of what we stored up there was extra silverware, napkins, and fold-out tables for when we did big events in the ballroom. I never went to the wing before this, not out of fear, but because there was no reason to. As luck would have it, I was selected to help host our annual New Year's Eve party in the ballroom. So we were tasked with going into the storage wing to grab some things and help set up. I and 3 other coworkers entered and exited the wing for hours without any incident whatsoever. Frankly, I was pretty disappointed, but whatever. It was a job, and I wasn't there for fun. I can't remember the circumstance, but later in the night there was something additional we needed from the storage wing. I volunteered to go in myself since it was probably my best chance at having a paranormal experience. Before going in, I took out my phone so that I could hopefully capture something. I went in, took extra time and care to peep into all the open doors I could find, and ultimately didn't see anything. I will say, though, it was eerily quiet the whole time. Disappointed, I grabbed whatever I needed and went back to join my coworkers. After my shift was over, I took a second to sit in my car and let it warm up. I had a large cup full of leftover lobster bisque from the party. Don't judge me, I love soup. It was pretty cold outside, so I was browsing through my phone while my old truck was defrosting. Out of curiosity, I went back to look at the video and see if I had captured anything just for fun. The video showed me walking through the hall up to the entrance of the wing. As soon as I opened the door to enter the wing, I could hear through the video what sounded like 4 or 5 people moaning in complete agony at the same time. It was as if you took audio of people screaming, distorted it, then slowed it down by 25%. I felt the blood drain out of my face listening to the video and was literally shaking since, at the time, I know for a fact I didn't hear anything. What's worse is that as soon as I left the wing and the door closed, everything was quiet again. I looked up at one of the windows of the abandoned wing and could swear I saw something move, but at that point I was so riled up I could have made myself see anything. I ended up posting the video on Facebook, and the company almost fired me for doing it. I thought it was strange at the time, but I mentioned the place by name, and I'm sure that wasn't great for publicity. It's still open near where I grew up, and I wish to God that there would be a paranormal investigation, but I doubt it will ever happen. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my story. I think the abandoned house of a mean old lady in my town is haunted. So in my town is an old house that has been abandoned and boarded up for a good 30 years after the old tenant died and the council boarded the house up, seeing as she didn't have anyone to give it to, according to word from my dad. My dad says he remembers this woman as being mean and cranky and as one who'd yell at kids for walking past and, in her later years, would yank her curtain open and glare out. Today I was walking down past that house to meet my stepdad after helping my mom with her Girl Guides group so he could drop me off at the train station. I'll start by saying this. The wind was blowing on the side of me that was closest to the house. One board was broken about a month or 2 ago, leaving the house open to be seen into. Therefore, it is likely that the house was occupied by a druggie, a careless adolescent, a squatter, or a homeless person. The window was also pretty deep. At least a foot inwards of it, seeing as it's one of the older houses in the town, so there would have been no modern heating systems. As I passed, I coughed slightly, and that's when it happened. Some unnameable force yanked the curtain. It wasn't one of those wind blowing it moments. Especially because the window was that deep and the curtain was too far back. Also, the movement was completely wrong for it to be like that. It wasn't swaying or fluttering. No. This was something different. Like an angry person tugging it aside. I didn't stop to see who or what it was. Instead, I began to run. I wasn't stopping to see what was coming out of there. I didn't want to see it. I haven't run so hard in all my life. I stopped where I'd meet my stepdad and looked back up the path to realize to my horror that nobody was standing on the path or going in or out of the house. Thing in the house, I don't know who or what you are. But for everyone's benefit, let's not meet face to face. Just knowing you're there is enough for me. The events of this story happened a couple of years ago to my friends and me after our last day of high school in our senior year. We decided to celebrate by hiking and camping in this massive forest close to our hometown. We talked about it for years, and this was going to be our celebration for graduating. Our friend group was pretty outdoorsy, but so were most of the people who grew up here. Anyways, we had always heard that there was a beautiful crystal clear lake in the middle of the forest. The lake was supposedly accompanied by breathtaking waterfalls. One of our friends, Chris, got hiking directions to the lake, and we decided to make this post-graduation trip a reality. Chris had the most outdoor experience out of all of us, so we trusted him to make the plans. It was Chris and his girlfriend Mindy, myself and my friend Danny, and our other friend Tony with his girlfriend Marissa. We planned the trip as a 3-day hiking trip, camping under the stars each night. It sounded amazing. We would reach the lake on the second day and then head back. We would have to camp one more night and be back on the third day pretty early in the morning. The trip started out amazing. I have never really been the biggest fan of sleeping in a tent, but the views were truly breathtaking. The sounds and the way the sun shined through the trees made it seem like we were exploring another world. Once it started to get dark, we decided to set up camp for the night. It was pretty comical watching us trying to set up tents while exhausted, but we managed to figure it out. We stayed up for a little while telling stories and playing pitch, But we called it a night relatively early so we could start back up hiking at sunrise. Danny and I woke up in our tent shortly after 3 a.m. We swore we could hear noises outside of the tent. It sounded like air moving, but it didn't have the howling characteristic of wind. He told me, of course, it was wind and there was nothing to worry about, but to me it almost sounded like whispers. I could hear sticks cracking in the distance. You'd expect to hear quiet, or even crickets or something, but instead it was all sorts of other racket. I had a horrible feeling that maybe there was a bear or something out there, or maybe even other people, and then fear came over me, feeling like we weren't alone. Danny eventually fell back asleep, but I remained wired for the remainder of the night. I sat, clutching my pillow, and jumped at every little noise. A little after 6 I heard Chris outside of his tent, and I went out to greet him. He also heard the weird noises and admitted that in all the years camping, he never heard noises like that but wasn't really alarmed. We packed up our gear and headed out to the lake. If we kept a good pace, we would make it by noonish. We all seemed sluggish and tired from the night. We were more worn out and short with each other today than the previous day. I had an uneasy feeling the entire day thinking someone was out there following us. At about 1230 we arrived at the lake, and honestly it was so worth it. The waterfalls looked like glass the way the sun reflected off of them, and the water actually looked like it was glowing. It was beautiful. We swam for a while and played by the waterfall. The events of the previous evening seemed to vanish from my mind for a while. We got dry and decided to start heading back so our third day of hiking tomorrow wouldn't be so bad. We set up camp about 5 hours or so from our cars. If it were up to me, I would have just kept walking, but anybody who has been in the woods at nightfall knows it is pitch black. It wasn't worth getting lost, so we decided to just camp and get home tomorrow. We were all beat and passed out almost right away after setting up camp. Again I was jolted awake a little after 3 a.m. This time there was no mistaking it, there were clearly voices outside the tent. We could hear women's voices, several of them, and they were laughing. Not only laughing like a giggle, but a deep screeching laugh. We could hear the branches on the ground breaking around us. It seemed like we were surrounded. Danny was awake with me, and he was scared stiff. We could only make out several words amongst the mumbles. We could hear the creepy voices say things in their low, drawn-out voices, flesh and strike, I want to strike. Those horrifying phrases were followed by more cackling and mumbles that we couldn't make out. We sat in fear all night, listening to these noises on and off. It would stop for a time and then start back up, almost sounding like it was directly outside the tent. At sunrise we heard Chris yell outside his tent. We all came out to find a crazy amount of footprints surrounding our campsite, and they went in all sorts of directions with seemingly no rhyme or reason. There were strange patterns of rocks and sticks set up all over the campsite. The sticks looked bent into almost human-like silhouettes. We packed up our gear in record time and nearly ran the rest of the way out of the forest. Unlike the previous 2 days, we heard laughing and twigs snapping in the distance the entire trek back to the cars. I and Mindy started to cry just because of the sheer panic and fear we felt while trying to race out of the woods and probably because we were extremely overtired. When we would look into the distance behind us or side to side, we could see nothing, just hear sounds. We finally made the nearly 5-hour hike in just under 4 hours. It was an amazing sight of relief to be able to see the cars. As we all ran to our cars to load the gear up, I sat in the passenger seat and waited for Danny. None of us have ever returned to that forest. I'm not really sure what happened to us over the course of those few summer nights. Some say witchcraft, and others say it was just some women or kids playing pranks on us. Others think it was our imagination, but we all witnessed the same thing. I know what I heard that night. It may not seem scary, but it was the most terrifying few nights of my life. What a way to start off graduation and my summer vacation. My hometown's sinister history. I grew up in a small town in east central Iowa. At first glance, there isn't much to see. It has only one stoplight on its main road. The downtown area is along the main street and is lined with old buildings from the 1940s. It has a Carnegie Library on the south side of town, and to the west you'll find the fairgrounds and the dirt track. For starters, for any music lovers out there, you may be saddened to hear that Buddy Holly and his band had their last meal in my hometown. They had their dinner at a diner called the Greasy Spoon before driving north and making their fateful flight into history. My grandmother lived in that town nearly all her life and said that particular diner was a horrible place and went out of business decades ago. This bit of history is fairly well known among the older population and those who like to study their town's history, but there is one more thing that is not nearly as well known. If you were to travel to the northwest side of town, you'd find lots of sprawling cornfields and a few old farmhouses dotted around the area, but in the middle of one of the cornfields, sitting away from all other buildings, stands a tall brick building called the Old Cedar County Home. The county home was built in the early 1900s as a poor farm for those less fortunate to have a place to stay and work. However, not everybody was liking this idea, and on the opening day, one of the heads of staff was attacked by a resident with a pitchfork. The records I have looked through haven't said whether the poor staff member survived the attack or not. Later on, around the 1930s, the building gained an addition in the form of a mental asylum, which soon took in their first patients. That particular time was rough for everybody, and the home's occupants continued to grow until World War II began. After the war was over, the poor farm side of the home began to diminish, while the mental hospital, now being called an insane asylum, continued to grow. It was at this time that the most atrocious events occurred. The head nurse of the asylum didn't like her patients very much, especially the insane women who either were or happened to become pregnant while there. The story goes that the nurse would be quite cruel to the pregnant women and make them work outside or do extra chores even though they could barely stand. When it came time for them to give birth, the nurse would drug the mothers, and as soon as the baby was born, the nurse would take the baby away and kill it, later telling the mothers that their baby was stillborn. The nurse was let go after a while, and the home itself began to fall into hard times until 2004, when its last residents were transferred elsewhere. The home and the land were bought by a farmer, but they still stand today as a reminder of their cruel past. The locals who do know about it say that it is probably a drug den now, and most agree that it is certainly haunted. As the home is on private property, exploring the remains of the building is a tough undertaking unless you want to risk getting arrested. However, some people have managed to find a way in and have shared some photos online. Most of which aren't too scary except for one that caught my attention right away. It was the words "I see you" spray painted in black paint. The future of the home is uncertain, as the farmer uses the land for storage and has left the home untouched all these years. But one thing is clear, you'll never catch me out there after dark. Haunted old farmhouse. I grew up in a suburban neighborhood in Virginia, the youngest of three. My sister, the oldest, got heavily into horseback riding, and we had a family friend who had a horse farm about 4 hours north. At least once a month, my parents, brother, sister, and I would go up for a weekend so my sister could get lessons. We're all 3 years apart, and although I can't remember my exact age, let's say I was about 10, my brother 13, and my sister 16. The property was about 70 acres with a large barn, a newly built one-story brick house, and an old white farmhouse built in the late 1800s. The property had an eerie atmosphere, even during the day. It had a waist-high black metal fence surrounding it, with an old tree with a tire swing attached. The man that leased the property with his wife would tell my brother and me about the house and the terrible feeling he would get when he used to go inside. He never said anything in particular, just that we should never go inside because it was dangerous. Apparently, the farm itself operated during times of slavery, giving off an even more sinister vibe. At this point I should say I'm not particularly religious. Even at a young age, I didn't really believe in ghosts, demons, or the supernatural. I was always afraid of the most logical things, like getting into a car accident or drowning at the beach. However, this experience makes me skeptical about my beliefs, which are grounded in science and tangible evidence. My brother and I were playing on the tire swing one day. He was pushing me higher and higher so I could get a good look into the second floor window. As I swung up, I saw what looked like a woman in either a nightgown or tattered dress. She had her back turned to the window, but I could make out the human figure and long, dull gray hair. I know it sounds super cliché, but I know what I saw. Her dress was open in the back, and although I only saw her for a second or two, her skin looked almost colorless, like an ashy gray, almost as if she'd been terribly burnt. I yelled out something to my brother to the effect of "Oh my God, I just saw something." He pushed me again, and as I looked into the window, she was gone. I jumped off the swing, and we ran into the barn's office to tell the owners what we saw. The man seemed concerned, but the wife shrugged it off, probably figuring that we were just imaginative boys looking to play a prank. My dad scolded us, telling us to stay outside the fence and to keep off the tire swing because it was old and could break while we were on it. Later that night, we asked our parents if we could ride our bikes around the barn. Since it was deep into the country, it was a relatively safe thing to do at night. The moon was extremely bright, illuminating our path as we pedaled through the humid August air. Our real intentions, of course, were to go back to the house and try to see if we could find anything. As we approached the house, we walked around back and saw in the same second floor window that a candle was lit and flickering. I've often thought that maybe it was a reflection, but the only other light was the moon, and this light was giving off an orange glow. We both got spooked and sprinted home, not telling anyone what we saw. We decided the next day we were going to go in the house. So, the next day came, and when no one was around, we removed the old plywood covering one of the bottom floor windows and climbed through. I noticed instantly that the temperature inside the house was significantly cooler than it was outside. I'm not sure how familiar you are with summers in Virginia, but they tend to be extremely humid, and it's always a relief when there's a breeze to help cool things down. Our AC has gone out before, and your house gets so hot it's unbearable to be in. I can't imagine that an 1800s farmhouse is able to stay so cool with no open windows or doors. The interior didn't have much. There were a few old boxes and some tarps covering random areas of the floor, and there was a stench of mildew in the air. We explored the downstairs, but to no avail. We didn't find anything noteworthy like we hoped. We made our way upstairs to the room where I thought I saw the woman. I needed my brother to believe me, but I secretly hoped that nothing would happen. Just as we reached the top of the flight, we heard a cracking sound from down the hallway followed by a loud crash downstairs. We rushed down the stairs to find an old tub had fallen from the second floor into the kitchen. We didn't stay long, but the tub was still in one piece, thankfully. I know it was an old house, but what are the chances that would happen the one time we were inside? Thank God neither of us was standing in the bathroom when it happened, because old clawfoot bathtubs are incredibly heavy. I wonder today what that bathtub was still doing in the house. It had to have been an antique tub, which could sell for a pretty decent price these days. We rushed out, putting the plywood back over the window we had gone through. We ran as fast as we could from the back of the house, down the hill to a small stream covered by a cluster of trees and bushes. We walked along the stream, both convinced we just witnessed something evil. To make things even worse, we reached an area where the water pooled into a wider creek. As we walked, trying to avoid the mud, we came upon a large number of bones, scattered into a pile that was about 5 feet in circumference. I can't exactly remember our conversation, but I think we were convinced that it was the remains of the people that used to live in the house. I'm not an expert on bones, but these had to have been fairly old because there was no flesh or cartilage still attached, and the bones themselves looked brittle and gray. However, I think today it was most likely where hunters would discard the remains of deer they had shot. We left that afternoon, and neither my brother nor I told anyone what had happened because we didn't want to get in trouble for going into the house after we were told not to. As we pulled away, I turned and looked through the back window of the car. There, standing in the second floor window, was a figure dressed in white facing the window this time. We were far enough away for me to not be able to see any facial features besides the long, dull hair and the terrible colored skin. The color of the skin was the most disturbing aspect, though I couldn't pinpoint why. I'm 27 now and still don't believe in the supernatural. The scientist in me knows the mind is a powerful thing, and 2 boys, likely bored on a farm, probably thought they saw a ghost. However, the bathtub is one thing that I'll never understand. Sure, it could have been a coincidence, but the fact that it had been sitting there for probably 100 years and that day it decided to fall makes me think that maybe what we saw was real. Regardless, I'll never be able to see old farmhouses the same way again. Haunting in an old college building, Iowa. I was a freshman at a small Methodist liberal arts college in Indianola, Iowa, in '84. One night after an evening study session at the campus library, I, then a 17-year-old female, and a good friend were walking when we were met with a voice behind us asking us if we'd like a tour of a supposedly well-known haunted building right there on campus. She and I recognized the person behind the voice and also recognized his friend, so we accepted the silly notion to break in, I know, the folly of youth, for what we anticipated would be harmless fun. Once we got past the half-cracked old wooden door with a loosely chained padlock, loose enough to slide under and past, and only one flashlight, one of the guys began to give a rundown of the recent history of why the building was shackled and ignored. Due to an accidental death of a young female student who was pushed from the 3rd floor or fell decades prior, and reports by numerous witnesses about a crickety piano being played by unseen hands by overnight caretakers of the property and apparitions they say fly from the chimney and over to the women's dorms on occasion. Background about me. I grew up the youngest of 6, my dad a reverend. The commingling of every type of energy found in those 100-plus-year-old churches and parsonages where the ministerial families lived while serving the community resulted in portals becoming open, and I and my older sister were unwilling witnesses. Translation. Hauntings. I wasn't a stranger to things moving by themselves, seeing wisps of a trailing gown going around a corner that no one else saw, or odors that mysteriously filled the room, cigar smoke, roses, rancid perfume, etc. I had also been to numerous sleepovers where the entertainment turned to trying to summon otherworldly entities through a Ouija board with no result, so going into this building was plain old boredom-altering fun for me. As the 4 of us were making our way up a wide staircase to the upper floors, if I recall, There were perhaps 4 levels, and the lead guy with the only light source was recounting the story about the student who fell to her death and subsequent woo-woo occurrences thought to be related. I was heading up the tail end of our walking convoy when I experienced someone, it was dark back where I was, who rushed past me going down while I was climbing up. I stopped in my tracks because right after acknowledging the presence, I became lightheaded. I started to implore my fellow explorers to wait for me when I heard what could only have been something flying past me. The staircase was in a square configuration with a great hole in the middle where one could look up to the floors above or down to the floors below by looking up or down into the gap between floors. This is the space the young lady plummeted through that day. I instinctively looked down, as if I could magically see what heavy object flew past. The next second I knew, the object landed, violently, on the floor below. The moments following were filled with alarmed voices and accusations from one to another about it not being cool to try to terrorize the rest with childish pranks. I absolutely knew what we went through was a residual event. We were in the midst of a haunting on a loop. The reenactment of the fatal fall likely occurred repeatedly before that night, and if the building still stands today, it may continue to do so. For days past leaving that building, I asked around to find out how long ago there were any new reports of strangeness happening, to verify the death of that young female student, verified, and to find out what steps the college administration took to address concerns. I did find out that a paranormal group came to campus and conducted an overnight investigation in the early 80s but never did find out what was concluded. From experiences at age 5 to the present day, I have evidently been sensitive to energy that's not congruent with what the physical senses can detect. With time and maturity I've learned to accept this second sight. Creepy experiences in an abandoned castle. I'm from Middle Europe. In my town there is an old abandoned castle from the 1750s. After the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was a hotel all the way up until the 1950s. It has been abandoned ever since. It's not much of a tourist attraction as far as I know, but people do visit occasionally. For example, someone's relative/friend comes to visit them, so they walk to the park, and ooh, that castle is cool, let's go and see it. As a 23-year-old who is bored and has a lot of free time, I believe this could be an interesting read for those who are interested in paranormal phenomena. I do believe in that, but I'm not obsessed about it. As kids we experienced weird shit there, mostly in the basement. The interior of the castle is nothing special, it is well lit and not scary, but there are 2 main basements and a couple of hidden ones that the older generation of kids found. They're nothing special, just 2 or 3 small rooms that look like a place where you'd hide fancy booze back in the day, and then there's a tunnel that leads to another village. It was built strictly as an escape tunnel, that is all blocked up by dirt and who knows what. So the history of the castle says a group of soldiers were escaping, and others just threw a ton of shit and blocked them in. They blocked the way for about 5 meters deep from both sides, that is still a long-ass tunnel, about 1.2 miles. Before the army began exploring the tunnel in the 1960s, little was known about it. They didn't go deeper than about 150 meters and, as my dad says, they found nothing. They got claustrophobic because the tunnel started at 2 meters wide but narrowed to half its size after 70 to 80 meters, making the air feel tight. Another reason for not going deeper was they kept stumbling upon groups of bricks that fell off the wall. They blocked it again. During the late 90s, 2 homeless people died there, one in the basement, and the other was drunk and probably fell down the stairs, inside the castle. Anyway, it's the scariest shit to go down there alone on a sunny day, let alone at night. I tried it once and never again, even though you can see the sunlight for about 10 steps in. I remember we used to explore down there before football practice. We just wandered around the castle, and after we got bored with it, we went down in the basement. Obviously, you need a flashlight or some kind of light, and if that dies, well, you can easily get lost in there and get paranoid very ducking quick and probably die of a panic attack, haha, no biggie. Older guys from my town ducked around there too. They even broke the wall in the tunnel and went there themselves, but not deeper than 10 to 20 steps because you start feeling that air pressure and it stinks like 3 possums crawled in there and died and then came back to life and took a dump and died again. I'm quoting one guy, lol. It was open like that for a couple of days back in the mid-2000s. Every single person that was inside said it was ducking creepy and you always feel like someone or something is all around you. So me and a couple of buds went in there. I can't describe that odd feeling of looking straight into the depth of the tunnel, knowing it's 2 kilometers long. The longer you look, the more paranoid and nauseous you get. It's such a suffocating and anxious feeling. It's exactly like staring at the monster from the Amnesia, the Dark Descent video game. And also because of the smell, you can't be in there for longer than a minute. You simply need to get out into the fresh air and come back in again. One kid thought it was a good idea to run into the tunnel to see what was more behind those 20 steps. I was there, as were many others. It was popular for us teens and preteens to mess around in that tunnel, knowing it would be cemented back in a matter of days, so we saw the idiot run inside. We obviously saw the light moving as he moved, but we couldn't see him. After probably 3 seconds of running, he was about 15 meters deep in the tunnel. The weird thing was seeing the light turn to us and then the other way. He was doing that for a couple of seconds. It seemed like he was disoriented, and even though there were only 2 options to go, he started yelling that he was lost, but we barely heard him. Suddenly, he began to scream, prompting one of the older guys to step in and help illuminate his path. That helped him, and he started walking towards us, then he just collapsed. He probably passed out from all the smell and air pressure. We got him out. He was so pale, and the weird thing was that he had this sort of stain on his shirt, a muddy stain. It looked like someone hit him over the back with a large, muddy log. But it was summer, and everything inside was dry. Maybe the tunnel was moist somewhere, but it sure didn't look like that. We called an ambulance, but he woke up after a minute or two saying how badly it stinks and he felt like someone was whispering to him. That's why he was turning around for some time. He said he heard us talking to him, but this whisper was something else entirely. It creeps me the duck out still to this day. Was that his paranoia acting up? Was he imagining that due to brain and air pressure? The tunnel was blocked the day after the incident by the city workers. I don't remember anyone entering that basement and tunnel anytime soon. Years later, we used to get drunk in the castle. We still visited the basement from time to time. What is still weird to this day is how about 5 minutes in there, you can feel this sort of air creeping around your neck, but you can't feel wind blowing inside. It feels like when someone is slowly exhaling behind you. I know it sounds like my buddies were ducking around, but then I would totally hear and feel the person behind me doing that. Besides, other people felt that eerie feeling around their necks too. We got convinced by other people it's just the wind and hand or body movements that cause that, and simply because of that basement, it's cold and it's dark, and it's only normal to get a little paranoid in a space like that. I don't know if this would be considered scary, but it still chills me sometimes. So about a year ago I was attending a community college. It was cheap, and I couldn't afford to go to my dream college. I have since transferred to another college. I knew the area well since the college is near my hometown, and I love the Commons. The Commons was an old mental asylum that was turned into a store complex, and other parts were turned into apartments. Around it was a lot of woods, and the place is downright beautiful. It wasn't like your normal horror asylum places, and I will get to how I know for sure in a bit. I have ASD, autism, for those not aware of the new name change, and I have always felt aware of things that surround me and am hypersensitive to things like lights, sounds, and touches. Anyway, one night, my friends and I decided to go to the woods near the Commons, where one of them lived. Around 1 a.m. it was a chillier evening in November, and there was a clear sky out, a great night to stargaze and explore the woods. I have also felt weird at the Commons, but like not a bad weird. Just like I was being watched, I felt heavy in my chest and lightheaded. So weird, not bad though. I was a bit nervous about returning to the Commons, but I was also excited because I love the place. When we got there, we hiked out to a small portion of the woods and just sat on some fallen trees and started chit-chatting. They then started talking about the Commons and how there must have been abuse there, as it was a mental asylum. While they were saying this, it got colder around me, and I felt as if there was someone there, not menacing, but sad and upset, like they were hurt. I have always been aware of presences but typically ignore them, as my biggest fear is ghosts and demons, but this time it felt different. I felt connected to this presence, and I felt obligated to let it in. I must have let it go too far in, as I blanked out and felt extremely cold. This next part is from what my friends told me. According to them, I started shaking violently and uncontrollably began to sob. They persisted in discussing the abuse they believed had occurred there, even though my voice sounded hoarse and unnatural. I kept shouting, "That isn't true. We are treated great here. I just miss my mama. I want to see my mama. Why did she send me here? I want to go home, but I will miss my friends." As I was shouting, I seemed to be trembling uncontrollably, and tears were streaming down my face. I kept repeating the same things and shaking like that for a few minutes. They said they just stood there in shock until one of the guys, Spencer, pulled me close and just held me, whispering that it was all okay and I would be okay. He later said he wasn't new to these events happening around him, as his mother was hyper aware of the paranormal and communicated with ghosts often. When I finally came back, I just remember hearing a faint, "Thank you for," and the coldness just left me. Spencer was still holding me, his body heat slowly warming me up, as I just stood there mildly confused. I only remembered sitting on the log and feeling the presence. I told the presence that it was okay and that I understood them before they entered me. Then I found myself in Spencer's arms. They told me what happened and that it scared them. They expressed a strong desire to leave, as they couldn't bear to stay any longer. As we were leaving, I felt a strange sensation, as if someone was pulling at my mind and saying, "Don't leave," but Spencer saw me staring into the trees and pulled me away as he guided me to the car. I still feel connected to the commons, and I feel at peace there. I looked it up later and learned that the people there were taught to garden and cook, normal things that just helped them feel like they belonged. I also found out that because I was diagnosed with severe autism as a child, I would have been institutionalized if I was born before the 70s. Guess where I would have most likely ended up? The commons. I still think about the commons and feel a draw to go there. When I'm there, I feel like someone is watching me. Not in a menacing way, but just watching me, almost pleading with me to come talk to them again. The cursed bunker. I'm going to tell you something that happened to me 3 years ago. It was a terrifying experience for me, to say the least. I won't say everything, because I don't want to remember it anymore, and believe me, don't try to understand either. I emphasize that the location is known only to me. It is an unlisted bunker. 3 years ago, I infiltrated an Urbex, a former German bunker from the Second World War, not far from my home. I left alone, since no one wanted to accompany me. I entered this bunker and explored it for a good 2 hours. At one point, I felt hyper-watched, like something was watching me from the shadows. After visiting this old bunker, I decided to leave, since, for me, it was nothing more. When I was leaving, I obviously took the same corridor, but there, in front of me, I saw a wall. I told myself I was wrong, but no. I tried every possible trick, but each time, I hit a wall. There, I told myself that I was going crazy. As I started walking around the bunker again to check if I was losing my mind, I vaguely heard German spoken. Well, maybe. I also heard footsteps. At that moment, I started to be afraid, but really, for the first time in my life. I ran and ran until I came across the entrance with the ladder. So, the question I would like to ask you is, do you also believe in the dead and in spirits? Because everything that is magic and spirits, believe in it. The creepiest haunted house I ever encountered. So about 21 years ago, my ex-boyfriend and I got talking about paranormal stuff and haunted houses. I told him that I always wanted to explore a real haunted house. So he told me over where he lives is a real haunted house. I was excited to know about this house. I asked him to tell me more about it. He goes, apparently there is this old 2-story house that a family of 4 used to live in. One day the family just up and literally disappeared. No one knows what happened to them. Just hearing that made me want to see the house even more. He mentioned that a couple of his friends had gone into the house and reported that everything the family owned was still there, including dishes, furniture, beds, and clothing. I thought that was completely strange, because if they moved, why leave everything behind like that? So finally the day came, and my ex-boyfriend called me and said to me, "Let's go check this house out, that's something we can do for the day." I replied, "Okay, sounds great, let's do this." This was in the middle of summer. This was advantageous because, given the location of the house, no one would be able to spot us inside. The trees that surrounded the house were in full bloom. Before we went to the house, I said to him, "Can we stop to get a disposable camera? I want to try and take pictures of the house." He said, "Sure, no problem." I'm so excited at this point, I couldn't wait to get to that house. As we made our way to the house, I thought to myself that it was likely located deep in the woods, off a well-traveled path. I was wrong. Going into this little town he lives by is a bridge, and once you drive over the bridge and make a left turn, then go about a mile down the road, off to the left is this dirt road. I asked him, "Does this dirt road go far back? What is this?" He told me, "It's the house's driveway and doesn't go that far." So we pull onto the driveway and drive down. We finally stop and park, and he tells me, "We are here." My heart pounded with excitement and terror simultaneously. So we both get out of his SUV. I'm standing on the driveway, observing my surroundings, and I experienced an unusual sensation regarding that property. Something just didn't feel right. We both look at each other and tell each other that we are going to walk around outside, and we will meet inside the house. I was walking around outside, and there was a bunch of tall grass surrounding the house, along with a number of oak and pine trees. I walked over to the house and took pictures around the outside. It had a number of broken windows, probably from people vandalizing the house. The chimney from the outside looked like it was collapsing into itself, and the roof was completely falling apart. Then we both found the front door after walking around the outside for about 20 minutes or so. We looked at each other, and I said to him, "Are you ready to go in?" "Let's go," he said to me. "Okay, Let's go do this. We entered the house, and the kitchen was the first room we saw. Everything you can think of that belongs in a kitchen was there. Everything from pots and pans to dishes and glasses was present. I'm still taking pictures of the inside of the house. The next room you walk into is a dining room/living room combination, and in that room was a table, and it was fully set for dinner. Nothing was disturbed on it. Everything was still in its place. Then, on the opposite wall, facing away from me, there was a chimney. Bricks were scattered all around the fireplace's entrance, leading to the chimney's eventual collapse. Then my ex looked over at me and said, "Hey, I found the steps to go upstairs, I'm going to head up." I asked him to just wait, like, 2 more minutes, and I'd walk up with him. Of course, he didn't. I'm still on the first floor, and then all of a sudden my ex yells down to me, "Do you smell that nasty odor?" I yell back up to him, "No, what does it smell like?" I've heard if you smell something that smells like rotten eggs, it could mean there are malevolent spirits nearby. I then asked him to hold on, I'll come upstairs to him and check it out. I walked over to the stairs. They didn't look very safe. There were actually large holes in the wooden boards, and as I ascended the bottom step, I noticed a similarly large hole in the ceiling. I wasn't too keen on those steps. I started to walk up the steps. About 5 or 6 steps up, there was a landing where I paused for a moment. Then all of a sudden, this horrific smell of garbage and rotten eggs was around me. I'm just standing there trying not to throw up, and all of a sudden my ex comes bolting down the stairs at me. He says to me, "Let's go now." I just heard a deep growling noise coming from upstairs. It's not an animal, I don't know what it is, and that smell is getting stronger. I told him, "Okay, let's go." We get outside of the house, and we are just walking back to his SUV. All of a sudden, we heard a loud, blood-curdling scream come from inside of that house, then a gunshot go off inside the house, then a loud growling coming at us. We start running back to his SUV. His SUV wouldn't start, we are both freaking out. We are nowhere near a shooting range, we are in the middle of some tiny town, and no one is in that house. He finally gets it started, and we book it out of there. A couple of days pass, and I go get my photos developed. The people from the photo place called me and told me they could only develop 5 out of the 25 pictures because they were nothing but all white or all black and blurry. I never once dropped that camera or took pictures while walking. I was standing still with everyone. My brand new SUV started to break down, all the engine fluid started to flood the inside of my brand new SUV. His brakes went bad, and his electric windows stopped working. I think whatever is in that house attached itself to his SUV and destroyed it as a warning to never come back. Port Chatham, town abandoned after a series of unexplained events? Hello, I am researching Port Chatham, a town in Alaska on the Kenai Peninsula that was reportedly completely abandoned after a series of unexplained murders and possible Bigfoot sightings, but there is a reason for the question mark at the end. I have been fascinated with this for a while, but once I truly started researching this, I didn't get very far. The reports are scattered, seem to quote each other loosely, and key dates are mixed up. The town was completely abandoned overnight in the 1930s, or maybe the 1950s. Maybe it took years, maybe it didn't, and there seems to be absolutely no mention of stories in the historical record that I can find. If there were multiple murders, one would assume that local papers would have reported on them to some degree. I have found no mention of these, despite having combed through the Library of Congress, genealogy websites, Alaskan archives, etc. There is supposed to be an article from the Anchorage Daily News in April of 1973 that gives further information, and though people quote it extensively, there seems to be no copy available online. Not doubting it exists, but it seems that people are quoting each other, not the original article. I am beginning to reluctantly reconsider this being a mystery at all. Certainly something strange happened there. There are legends of a hairy man or Nantianok in that area. But it seems that the abandonment, which absolutely did happen, as can be attested to by its status today as a ghost town, was of a more sensible sort and certainly not overnight, despite the hyperbolic claims found in some articles that are basically rehashes of what is already out there. None of the names mentioned in the articles or the events involved were traceable or had any corroboration. It seems it has been sensationalized, turned into a legend, and doesn't have any legs to speak of. On the other hand, there are scores of ghost towns all over the North American continent, and none seem to have this kind of legend attached to them. And that makes me curious as well. Were there true events that can be verified that lent themselves to legend? Was this media hype based on a few stray facts that were combined to create an ominous picture? This is the only ghost town I've ever heard of, and its departure story, if I may use that term, revolves around the town's escape from supernatural or supernormal events. That's driving me crazy at the moment. I'm figuring out why that should be so. I want to stop digging, but where there is smoke, there might be fire, or maybe some asshole is vaping and it isn't worth my time. I would love any input on this or even similar stories of frustration in searching for facts amidst legends or even abandoned towns I have not heard of with a supernatural departure story. I checked the town's abandoned school and can't explain what happened. I apologize ahead of time for the lengthy read. I work the night shift as a policeman in a small town. The population here barely breaks 1,000. Needless to say, I know the town well enough to be able to tell when something is off. Near the center of town there is the old school they used before they built the new elementary and high schools. The building is listed as a historical site, and the building can't be demolished, but due to asbestos, renovations would cost the town too much to be worth the work. This school sits within feet of the public library, and behind it sits the town's fairground. It isn't an official fairground, but every year they had bull riding and small child shows they put on in the summer. With all of those details out of the way, I will explain what happened. I noticed the backlight to the library on, which is not normal since it wasn't on all night and it isn't a motion light. So I parked on the north side of the old school grounds. I walked through a gap in the fence and had to pass the school to get to the library. I would stop every few feet and listen because the gravel was so loud. When I stopped the second or third time, I thought I heard a squeal in the school, like a door. And at first I didn't think anything of it, since I figured I was hearing things. The town just replaced all of the windows on this building, so I thought I wouldn't hear the inside. When I investigated the light and found all the doors locked, I was walking back around to my car. As I walked by the school again, I heard a noise in the building again, and I stopped and listened and shined my light, noticing a basement window was broken out. So when I walked up to the window, I looked down in and didn't see anything. I kept walking, and I heard the squeal again. It reminded me of those bathroom doors in schools that the hinges always squealed really loud and echoed. When I came around the corner, I saw two cats roughhousing in the dirt. They stopped to watch me, and then both of them turned and looked at a door I couldn't see myself because it was around another corner. One hissed, and they both bolted away from the school, which put me on edge. I know this school is absolutely not in use, nor are there any plans to use this school anytime soon. Also, the local kids and homeless don't come here, ever. It is a landmark the city as a whole really admires, and there hasn't ever been an issue with breaking and entering for a long time. So when I came around the corner, I saw the door, and I walked up to it to see what the cats had run from. I looked for other animals, but that didn't make sense because they looked up as if someone was standing in the window of the door, not like they would if it were a raccoon or dog that ran off without me seeing. When I looked in the window with my light, I could see a gigantic Raggedy Andy painted on the wall, and I assumed this was the kindergarten section or something, and then I stepped back from the door, getting ready to leave, and I heard whistling. It wasn't really loud, but it was loud enough to make me stop. That little voice in the back of my head was talking now and telling me I was just hearing things, but the dude that likes the dump of fear of the unknown told me to go back to the door. So I went back and listened again, and I know it was whistling and not like the squeak of an animal or object from inside. It got louder when I came to the door again, and it had a tune, but I don't know how to describe it. So now thinking someone is in the school, I went around and checked all the doors, including the second floor door that I had to climb the rusty metal stairs that were more like a death trap. When I couldn't find a way into the school, I checked it all over again, and when I left, I couldn't figure out what it was. The whistling had stopped, and I even hung out outside for a few minutes without my light on, just watching, figuring if someone was inside, they would eventually need to use a light to get around or back out. But there was nothing after 20 or so minutes. So I got in my car, circled the block, and parked nearby with my lights off to see if anyone would come out. But no one did, and there haven't been any lights inside. I know this story seems kind of boring compared to the others, but working nights gets you on edge, and for all the things I know I experienced before, this was in my top 5 bone-chilling moments while working. I wanted to debunk the noise and the cats, but I wouldn't even know where to start with it. Like the title says, I can't explain what happened. Hope you enjoyed listening to it. Haunted Elementary School. I am a 19-year-old girl, and I have just started working as a janitor in our local school district. I'm on the call board, and they send me to a lot of different schools. This Friday I got a call to go to this little elementary school just outside our town, and I saw no reason not to take it. And since I don't have my full license, my mom had to drive me. She's a janitor as well and was working nearby, so it wasn't too big of an issue. When I arrived at the school, I checked in at the office, where I met the principal. She was a very nice lady. She showed me around the very tiny school. It had 4 small classrooms and a music room, a special needs room, and a gym. When I got to cleaning, there were still teachers there, but I was in a room by myself and suddenly felt really ill and almost passed out, but I couldn't move. I don't know if that has anything to do with what happened, but I thought I'd throw that in. There was one teacher that came back to grab something from her classroom. A while later, I was heading down that way, and I heard footsteps down that hall. I turned the corner and didn't see anyone. I checked her classroom, and she wasn't there. There was no one else in the building. After all the teachers left, I still felt like there was someone in the building. I walked around the school to make sure all the doors were locked, and the whole time I had this unnerving feeling that someone was watching. I walked through the school and did not encounter anyone, yet I still experienced an unsettling sensation. But after that, things started to pick up. The first time I went into the janitorial room while no one was there, I heard 3 knocks on the wall, then a little pause, then 3 more knocks. I heard a loud cry from that same hall that I heard the footsteps before. I also heard some moaning. I was so on edge the whole time I thought going on my break and sitting down might help calm my nerves, but what happened just made my mental state even worse. I was sitting at a table in the staff room when I heard footsteps down the hall coming toward me. I then felt 2 hands gently placed on my back, slowly pushing me forward, followed by a very deep laugh, which scared the shit out of me. After my break, all I had to do was take out the garbage, recycling, and compost and then mop. I put all the bags outside so I could take them to the bins when I was finished. I was going to get my mop bucket ready, and when I was walking into the janitorial room, there was one very loud bang on the wall. I quickly filled my mop bucket and began mopping the bathrooms. I had one last bathroom task to do. And I was dreading this last bathroom because it was in the kindergarten room, and that's where I was getting the worst feeling. But I had to do it. When I was done mopping the kindergarten bathroom, I quickly glanced behind me into the closet by their bathroom, and that's when I saw him. Standing in the corner looking at me. I froze, I couldn't move at all. Until I built up the strength to turn around to see that he was gone. I dumped my mop bucket and just really wanted to get out of there, but I had 30 minutes till my shift was over, and I still had to turn all the lights off. I really didn't want to be in this place with the lights off. Which I know sounds really childish. But eventually I convinced myself to just get it over with. And as I got to the kindergarten room, I just became covered in goosebumps from head to toe. I had all the lights off except one by the door for my sake. And I still had 20-some minutes left, so I decided that I should try and find the bins outside because I didn't really know where they were. I went outside and turned the corner, and as soon as I did, both outside lights turned off, and I could see that the lights in one classroom were now back on. Shit. I headed back to the door, and I looked to the right of the building where the playground was, and I could see something sitting in the playground a few feet from the fence, but I didn't want to freak myself out anymore by looking at it for too long, so I went back in to turn off those damn lights. I then called my mom to ask where the bins were because she had worked there once before. Now that I knew where the bins were, I could take out the garbage and stuff. I had 3 bags, and I had to do 2 trips because one of the bags was really heavy. So I got to the bins, and I was about to put one of the bags in the bin, and right before I did, the outside light turned off again, and I looked back at the bin to see it was the wrong one. I scooted over to the right bin, and the light turned back on. As I walked back to get the last bag, I told myself not to look at the playground, but my curiosity got the best of me. I looked, but the thing was gone. I was confused. However, after emptying the other bag, I went back inside and immediately felt a rush of goosebumps. So I clocked out early and left. As I was walking down to the parking lot, I glanced back at the playground and saw the thing sitting in the same place as before. I quickly looked forward but turned my head back to see it was right up against the fence. I freaked out. I wanted to cry the whole time I was waiting for my mom in that empty parking lot. Eventually my mom came to get me, and she asked how my day went, and I told her the school was haunted. She just said, "Didn't I tell you?" She then told me the stories other coworkers have told her. I hope they never ask me to work there ever again. I used to work security in an abandoned warehouse. A few winters ago I worked security for a company that was in the process of converting an abandoned warehouse into one that was up to par for modern day work. This was a pretty tedious task. The warehouse had lain empty since the 1980s, and the years had not been kind to it. The plants had not overtaken the building, as it was well within a concrete jungle, but it was still far enough off the beaten path that it had attracted a number of residents who had not been kind to it. Most of the copper that wasn't bolted down or just too difficult to reach had been stolen, so all of the wiring had to be redone. There were cracks in the windows, leaks in the ceiling, and so on. In truth, part of me wondered if it wouldn't have been easier just to tear the place down and rebuild. The earlier days of the job were largely uneventful. Squatters and random urban explorers quickly realized that the building was undergoing renovations. A chain-link fence topped with barbed wire was up around most of the construction equipment, new locks were placed on the doors, and there were various security installations to deter anyone from trying to make off with exposed equipment or materials. You know those motion-sensing lights that people place outside their homes to deter burglars? We had an advanced version of those lights. They would flood an area with this bright, almost sickly green light, but it was blinding to whoever was caught in it. We also had a silent alarm that would sound if it were triggered, and as a final failsafe, a deafening alarm could be pulled by security in conjunction with it. For some relevant context, there was one largely unsupervised entrance into the building. A series of maintenance access corridors spanned throughout the walls, and these could mostly only be entered from inside, but there was one external entrance. There was an unloading area that adjoined the basement of the building. Trucks could drive down a ramp into a tunnel and enter this area, and along the side of the tunnel, there was one entrance into the maintenance access corridors. Most of the employees weren't aware this door existed, as it now served precious little purpose. Only some of the renovators pointed it out to me, which is how I came to know about it. That tunnel and the adjoining area would likely be the last place to be touched, and in all honesty, I wasn't even sure it was going to be, as I didn't know if the current company intended to make use of it. The door wasn't in plain sight, it was behind a guardrail, and it went up into the building at a sort of angle that made it difficult to see unless you were facing it from a certain direction. It would be entirely possible to walk or drive right past it and never know it existed. It was an imposing, albeit unassuming, old steel door. The hinges themselves had some rust on them, but the door was in mostly good shape. The door, despite its dark color, appeared to be unpainted. The handle was stainless steel and it aged the best of all from the door. This was the one giveaway of the door's existence. If you were in the tunnel and it was dark enough, a flashlight or natural lighting would glint off of the handle, indicating it was there. For obvious reasons, we kept this door locked, but it was easy to forget it was there. We never patrolled the maintenance access corridors as part of the security routine. It was generally assumed that to even get inside of them, an intruder would have to trip the alarm well before even being able to enter those, and it wasn't entirely safe. There were exposed wires, and those corridors were extremely claustrophobic, not to mention that once you were in them, you had to know where the exits were or you'd be wandering around lost for quite a while. Moreover, some of the exits no longer worked, or at least, weren't operational for now due to the ongoing construction. This brings us to December 22nd. It was one of the worst sorts of winter nights. Despite the cold and rain, the temperature was just warm enough to cause freezing rain and prevent snowfall. The wind blew past the warehouse with a spooky moan, but not quite a howl. At this time of year, it got dark around 6 or so by midnight, it was nearly pitch black outside. The storm just added to this. It had been a particularly boring night. The lull of the rain and the constant hum of yellow fluorescent lights had left me feeling quite sleepy. I had tried reading to pass the time, there wasn't any Wi-Fi, and phone reception was rather poor, but I couldn't make myself focus. I considered sleeping, but I had this weird gut feeling that I needed to stay awake. I wasn't afraid, and I didn't feel like I was being watched or anything like that, it's hard to explain. I just had this sense that I could nap later, but I needed to wait up a bit just to be certain it'd be appropriate. I didn't want my boss reviewing the footage and thinking I had gone to sleep too early, I suppose, but I don't feel like that was quite what I was thinking at the time. So it was with lidded eyes and a nodding head that I heard a click from somewhere within the facility. At first, my mind didn't even register it. I had just let it be the background noise, and then I realized it wasn't that. It was an abnormal sound. At once I was wide awake and immediately looked at my surroundings. Nothing had fallen, and nothing was out of place. I was almost tempted to shrug it off as an electrical issue, but it just didn't sit right with me. I had been there long enough that I knew more or less what the building sounded like, and that wasn't a noise I'd heard before. I decided I'd just do a routine patrol, nothing fancy, and make sure the doors were still locked, and that would be enough. As I left the rudimentary security post, which was really a desk surrounded by filing cabinets, I began to feel a sense of unease creeping into my spine. I couldn't place what it was, but the further I got from my vantage point, which allowed me to see most of the main floor, the less safe I felt. I felt exposed. Vulnerable. Every step I took made me want to retreat back to the desk. I shook it off. I told myself that I was being silly. Hell, I'd chased off homeless people before. It wouldn't be any different if that's what it was. The self-reassurance didn't work. This felt different, somehow. I went door to door, and each of them was locked as it was supposed to be. Seeing this made me feel a little bit better, and by the time I'd visited the final door, I was mostly able to shove the burgeoning dread out of my mind. I was satisfied with the inspection and figured the sound must have been from the storm, somehow. It didn't make sense, but it was the only thing I could figure out at the time. I shrugged it off and began to walk back to the desk. I had almost made it to my seat when I heard a sound that sent a chill down my spine. It was a distinct rattling sound, as though someone was rattling a doorknob somewhere within the facility. I froze, and I listened. The sound continued only for an instant, and then there was a gentle, but distinct, thud. Someone had tried to push their weight against a door, and it had held. My first instinct was to check my pager and see if the silent alarm had been tripped. To my surprise, and confusion, it hadn't. I frowned. I would write it off as a wayward bat thrashing about in the rafters, but the sound had seemingly come from against an outside wall, and a bat wouldn't be able to rattle a doorknob. I remained still for a moment. I listened for something, anything, but all I could hear was the rain against the rooftop, the wind, and the din of cheap warehouse lighting. I sighed through my nose. The fear had given way to a feeling of annoyance now. I started the long walk across the concrete floor to check the doors once again, and then I remembered it. The outside door. The click. Someone was in the maintenance corridors. My heart rate immediately picked up. That feeling of unease had given way to near terror. Despite my initial instinct to trigger the loud alarm, I couldn't muster the courage to do so. If the person didn't know that I was in the building, it had tipped them off. It was possible they were lost and trapped in the corridors for now, but if they got out. I set off the silent alarm instead. I knew I was going to have to go into the corridors, but this was extremely unsettling. I was going to have to hope I came in behind the person and that I was the one stalking them, not the other way around. I quietly walked over to the nearest door, a tiny metal frame with a glass window that allowed one to see inside, and peered into the corridor. It was virtually pitch black. I looked to the left and the right. To the right was a junction leading to a corner of the building, while to the left stretched a long, empty corridor. I slowly opened the door, letting it gently shut behind me, and flicked on my flashlight. This corridor was empty. I went to the right first. I figured that if the intruder came down the left corridor, I would have ample time to react, but I would rather not be caught by surprise by him rounding the corner. As I reached the turn, however, I hesitated. I was utterly terrified that I would round the corner and be face to face with the intruder. I could almost feel their eyes on me. I even took a step backward. I listened. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. I bit my bottom lip and rounded the turn and was greeted by an equally empty corridor. This one didn't run as far. I was relieved. I began making slow, deliberate steps down the corridor, careful not to trip over wiring and pipes, and would stop every so often to listen. It was still silent, eerily so. I had made it about halfway down the corridor when I heard a doorknob rattle again. It was hard to ascertain how close I was to it now, as the sound echoed down the hallways. I froze. The rattling continued before it was followed by a heavy bang. They weren't being subtle anymore. They had slammed into the door. I wasn't sure if they were even in the corridor anymore and decided now was the best time to turn back. The police had to be here soon. I would just go back to my desk and wait it out. That's what I should have done from the beginning. Entering the maze was a mistake. I rounded the corner to get back to the door from where I'd entered, and as my flashlight fell on the corridor, I almost missed it. Almost. The light illuminated a silhouette at the end of the hall. There was a man, or what I assumed to be a man, standing still at the end of my flashlight's beam. He was tall. Extremely so. Despite his height of 6 feet 6 inches, he didn't appear lanky, rather, he appeared slightly overweight and hunched over in the cramped corridor. He seemed to have his head angled down a bit, and he was wearing all black. We both stood there for a moment, motionless. I was paralyzed with fear. I can't say what it was about him, but he just felt wrong. That man didn't seem like a squatter seeking shelter. I can't explain it, but I knew that he had malicious intent. Trying to hide the shakiness in my voice, I summoned the scariest tone I could muster and shouted out, "Security! Freeze!" He didn't move for a moment. I began walking towards him, fully intending to exit through the door in which I'd entered and lock him in the chamber, and he started barreling towards me. I mean, a full-on sprint. He was faster than I expected, faster than he should have been, and the footsteps echoed in the corridor. I instinctively bolted for the door, but I shouldn't have. It made him rapidly draw closer to me. As I ran for the door, I could hear his staggered breathing as he drew nearer and nearer. He beat me to the door. Knowing that I was heading there, he stopped and waited for me. I froze once again. I wasn't able to hide that my hands were shaking. The flashlight beam thrashed wildly about the corridor. He seemed even larger up close. He stared down at me with inky black eyes. The man was probably in his mid-40s, but it was hard to tell. He had long gray hair and similarly gray stubble, and his face was eaten up with what looked like pockmarks. His black clothes were dripping with water, and a black beanie covered the top of his head. He smiled a wide, toothy grin at me and took a step towards me. I wanted to run, but he knew that the nearest doors were locked. It was pointless. "Don't come any closer," I demanded. He took another step. And then another, and he was now uncomfortably close to me. He had that rancid, sticky sweet smell that rotting meat has, topped with cigarette smoke. He leaned down slightly, bringing his face close to mine, and I caught a hint of peppermint and alcohol on his breath. He reached a gloved hand towards me and placed it on my shoulder. He spoke with this childlike voice. It was falsely high-pitched and sounded like a voice that a kindergarten-aged child would use to taunt one of their friends, but this came over his natural gritty baritone and years of being a hard smoker. "Hag, you're it." He kept his hand on my shoulder and just stared at me, grinning, for what felt like an hour, and then he slowly turned around and bolted back down the corridor, laughing with this horrible laugh as he sprinted into the dark. I didn't move. I couldn't move. I waited until I heard the footsteps and demonic laugh grow quieter and quieter, and when I was sure he was far enough away, I ran for the door, nearly fell out of it, forced it shut, and locked it behind me. I then sprinted across the concrete floor to the main entrance, sounded the noise alarm, and ran outside into the rain. I stood outside, back against the wall of the building, panting for breath. I couldn't even feel the cold. I didn't feel the cold until I heard the sirens. I was numb when the police walked past me. Although I was able to speak, it felt as though my body was operating automatically and I was observing from a distance. They combed the entire building, corridors included, but they didn't find anyone. They did, however, find that the door to the maintenance access from the tunnel was open. They also found a large butcher knife, a half-drunk bottle of bottom-shelf vodka, and a sheet of notebook paper with a smiley face drawn on it between the door and the guardrail.